Hey guys, welcome to episode 85. Stephanie, good to see you here. Chelsea, Robbie, Robin. We are going to be. Hey, don't you want to slide back a little? Okay, let's slide back. Timmy says hi. It's very, very cold here, but yeah, I'm glad to be back on Van Gogh letters. We do want to generally just try and keep pace with what is going on in the chronology of the letters. So yeah, I want to have a quick look at the poll because it's quite an important question. Let's see what you guys have said. Wow, has the poll expired? If it has, I'm going to have to put it up all over again. How many letters did Paul Gauguin write to Vincent during his first year in the asylum? Any thoughts on that? Can't believe it's expired. Okay. Sorry that I've postponed this live a couple of times. I just suddenly was extremely, extremely tired. Anyway, I've definitely been scrimping on sleep. So the question is, how many letters did Paul Gauguin write? And the possible answers are none, one. So it's hard to type when I've only got one hand. Okay, it looks like I've lost the poll that I set up. Sorry about the slow start, guys. I'm just trying to. I thought the poll was up, but it's been taken down, or it's no longer active. Let's try it again. Okay. And then the possible answers are none, which the original voters voted for the most. 8, which got the second amount of votes. 1 and then 2. Those are the options. Okay, it should be up in another second or so. So it's just hard doing this with one hand. Just a second. Okay, start poll. Okay, please vote on the poll. Because I do want to start there. I do want to start the letters on this particular question. And we're not going to go very far into the chronology. We're going to go, we are now in the middle of June. We're only going to go up to kind of the present, the 4th of July or so. By the way, it's 4th of July here. Happy 4th of July to you guys. Also, sorry, I just haven't gotten around to preparing this live for members only. So we'll do from Van Gogh Letters 86, we'll do something like the first hour like this, and then there'll be a little break, maybe 10-15 minutes, 5-10 minutes, and then the rest will be members only. Okay, but Robin, you've got another chance to answer. Okay, let's see what you guys are saying. Let's see what your answers are. I don't see the poll now. I don't see the poll. There we have it. 12 votes. Can we get a couple more votes? There we have it. Most say none. 12 votes. Can we get a couple more votes? There we have it. There's most say none. 12 votes. Can we get a couple more votes? There we have it. There's 13 votes. Most say none. Take it. 12 votes. Can we get a couple more votes? There we have it. There's
two
10
thirds
votes.
come
Most
over
say
one.
none, take it.
12 votes.
Can we get a couple more? There we have it. There's
Two
10
thirds
votes.
come
Most
over
say
one.
none, take it.
12
Thank you,
votes.
Vincent.
Can we get a couple more?
There we have it. There's
Two
10
thirds
votes.
come
Most
over
say
one.
none, take it.
12
Thank you,
votes.
Vincent.
Can we get a couple more?
There we have it. There's
Two
10
thirds
votes.
come
Most
over
say
one.
none, take it.
12
Thank
votes.
you, Vincent.
Can we get a couple more?
There we have it. There's
Two
10
thirds
votes.
come
Most
over
say
one.
sorry about that. Echo fixed. Ellie says, I'm not a member anymore. Well, members have only just been created on this platform. Okay, so let's get down to business. So at the moment, 69% say that Paul Gauguin didn't write any letters, and that is hopefully why you guys are here, because we're learning. We had to learn, and there's certain things we don't have clarity on. So that answer's wrong. He didn't write 0 letters. And then 36% said that he wrote 1 letter. That's also not correct. It's also not correct. So if it's not none or 1, what do you think the answer is? If it's not none or 1, what do you think it could be? Is the echo still happening? It should have been fixed. So the correct answer is 2. Paul Gauguin wrote 2 letters to Van Gogh. Between now, basically, and the end of the year, and both those letters basically came at the end of the year, right? Both those letters came at the end of the year. Okay, so is the echo gone? So what does that kind of tell you? It tells you what we've been thinking about all along, is that there was some fallout between the two of them. So if you think about it, they're bosom buddies, especially from Van Gogh's perspective. He couldn't wait for Gauguin to join him. He was interior decorating for his pal. He was painting pictures to put into his room. He was writing him letters. Are you coming now? What's going on? Gauguin was saying, I am coming, but I'm just doing this or whatever. And then they were womanizing together. They were painting together. They were doing everything together. And then suddenly gone. Gauguin's gone. And so what there's no doubt about is that they had an argument. But what's also, I think, you've got to read between the lines is Van Gogh, let's say Van Gogh cut off his own ear, and then let's say Van Gogh ended up in an asylum. At what point does Gauguin care? At what point does Gauguin say, hey, how are you doing, right? And think about it, Gauguin still has a relationship with Theo, so it's actually almost out of professional courtesy that he should follow up and how's it going, kind of thing, and yet he doesn't. And doesn't that show where if Vincent van Gogh doesn't harbor any ill will, well, obvious ill will, if Vincent doesn't harbor any animus, well, Gauguin certainly does. And so that's why Gauguin doesn't write to him for 6 months from now until the end of the year when he's in the asylum. And it's not as though he just doesn't write. Vincent writes to him, he doesn't write back. That should tell you something. Thanks a lot, Robbie Robin. Thank you. So it's quite an interesting revelation, that if you think about it, while all of this is going down, Gauguin could also be a friend to Vincent, could also be just writing the odd letter. How's it been going? What have you been doing? Kind of thing. and yet he basically turns his back completely on Van Gogh, right? And isn't that because he was quite angry with him over something? Okay, so we're going to now jump into the letters. I do think what is also incredible is think about it kind of globally. So this is the letter he wrote to Theo. It was what we ended yesterday on. It's the letter dated 17 or 18 June. And he finally mentions Starry Night. And he, where does he say it? A new study of a starry sky, and then he talks about Gauguin as well. Um, he he has actually been trying to paint something of significance, and that is when he executes Starry Night. That's what we dealt with in 82, 83, 84. But the incredible thing is the aftermath to that. He paints a painting that's going to change modern art, that's going to be a blockbuster. And then you ask, okay, so after he painted Starry Night, what happened? Did did he get invited to the Oscars? Was he Oscar nominated? Did he get a big paycheck? Did he? What happened after he painted this blockbuster? And the answer is nothing. The answer is actually that the aftermath to painting Starry Night was that Joe fell pregnant. Joe said she was pregnant, and then he heard even less from his brother. So it's almost like never a good deed goes unpunished. He puts in this incredible effort. He digs into himself in the first week in the asylum. He produces Starry Night, and then nothing. Um, that's pretty shocking. And at the end of this analysis, at the end of Van Gogh Letters 85, I want to address Theo's reaction. Now, at this point, Theo's heard about Starry Night and not really commented about what he's heard, but it's going to be about 6 months later that he actually receives Starry Night. What do you think Theo's response is when Theo gets Starry Night? So when Theo receives Starry Night, what do you think happens? What do you, anyone, does anyone know? If you do know, don't spoil it. But is there anyone here that knows how Theo reacted when he saw Starry Night? Yeah, and I mean that's the question. Does Theo like it? Right? Okay, so we're gonna now move on from this letter that we dealt with in episode letters 84, right? And go on to the very next letter. And that's this one, 25th of June. It's basically been a week. A week has passed since painting Starry Night and writing this letter, right? A week goes by. And that already is quite significant. It's not like he's getting a standing ovation. Basically, he just continues in the asylum. There are people screaming around him. That's really his audience, right? Thanks a lot, Stephanie, for putting that. If you want to follow Van Gogh Letters in on your own computers, it's this letter, this link that's been put there. Thanks, Stephanie. And anyway, let's continue. So he says, "My dear Theo, enclosed you will find an order for paints to replace the one in my last letter. We've had some glorious days. You can imagine it's the middle of summer, and I've set even more canvases going so that there are 12 size 30 canvases in prospect." Now, if you think about this in realistic terms, Van Gogh has just painted Starry Night. In a real sense, he's on fire. Like he is really as an artist, he's really coming into his own. You know, he's really at the peak of his powers, one could say. And a week goes by. Look where he is. He's in the asylum, and I was trying to paint the next picture and paint the next picture. but he's basically all on his own. And things are in the background are actually kind of unraveling. He just doesn't know it. So he goes on to say two studies of cypresses, and I must say this is one of his best pictures as well. This one, Stephanie, I think we've actually seen this picture in person, right? In Manhattan. So I'd rather just show the original because it's better. The original picture actually looks more like this. Okay, that gives. I'd rather use this version than. It says here that it's actually exhibited at the Kroller Moller Museum. I've been there as well, so maybe Stephanie, you haven't seen it, but let's just see if we can download it. Okay, there we go. Yeah, I seem to remember photographing this picture up close, especially this part of it, this part here. I've actually still got those photos, but I think you'll agree with me. This is one of his most beautiful pictures as well. Look how these actually look like Japanese ladies, if you ask me. But there's a bit of a Starry Night quality here. The little houses, the mountain. This is what I call Boompie Bergie Huisie art, which is Afrikaans for small for tree mountain house art. So where you kind of have that combination in your pictures, which are kind of quaint, right? And so can you see Van Gogh is kind of at the height of his powers right now, but he's also at the complete. He's sort of in the nut house, and also everyone's couldn't be further away from him. That's got to be frustrating. That's got to be pretty frustrating. Like you can imagine, he's really excited to talk about what he's seeing, what he's thinking, what he's executing, and no one's really listening. It's like, okay, well, you are a loser, and you are, even if someone's got a good opinion of him, the basic thing is, well, you are where you are. See ya, we'll see you on the other side, kind of thing. And then he also paints this, which is very yellow, isn't it? I also don't. Let's try and find a non-web exhibits version. Because I doubt whether the original looks quite as jazzy as that. Let's have a look. So what's really interesting in this figure, can you see there's the Reaper over there? That he includes the Reaper in this particular image. So I don't know whether the original looked like that, but this is another version of it. And there you see the Reaper over there, right? And what do you think he's communicating with this whole idea of the Reaper? What do you think is basically being communicated by that? Well, the Reaper represents death. The Reaper represents death, and in a way, he is experiencing right now a kind of living death, right? And the wheat represents humanity, right? Are you following? And so, in a way, he's painting not only his situation, but a more global situation. The common predicament we find ourselves in collectively. We are all going to die. We are all alive right now, but we are all in the predicament of life, which is, well, we're alive for now. By the way, I'm reading a book called The Running Grave, written by J.K. Rowling. This is her pseudonym. It's called The Running Grave, and The Running Grave is another way of saying death. It's basically that we are trying to outrun death, and death is running after us. Wherever we are, death is running after us. But what I'm trying to get at is Vincent is keying not only into his own humanity and his own mortality, but he's keying into that idea in a more general way. In other words, he's feeling the burden of humanity on himself in the same way that he's feeling the burden that he's going through as well. And as soon as an artist does that, he can really speak authentically about the human condition. In other words, he's keying his own experience is keying into the more global experience, the more collective experience. So he's not just thinking about it or speaking about it or painting about it or writing about it hypothetically. He's living it. He's living it. And so these paintings that he's painting aren't just hypotheticals. These are blood, sweat, and tears. He's sweating blood to execute these masterpieces, right? And that's why they are so in a way valuable, because it's not hypothetical. It's lived experience. It's real suffering, right? It's real anguish that is translated onto canvas, right? That's why he's thinking about life and death. He's in an asylum. He's got some sickness. He doesn't know what it is. And yeah, he's right to be thinking about that. A year from now, he's going to be dead. About 18 months from now, Theo's going to be dead. He's not wrong thinking about these themes. And think about the theme that came before, the Annunciation of the Shepherds. Jesus is about to come into the world. God is about to come into the world. A child is about to be born into the world. And guess what? A child is about to be born into the world. Joe and Theo are about to have a child. He doesn't know this, though. Although you can anticipate that when someone gets married, that is likely going to be the next step. But at this point, Theo and Joe probably know that that's happening. Of course, Theo and Joe are rolling in the hay, whereas Vincent's only painting hay, kind of thing. Yeah, I must say I don't really like the bad way that the Reaper is executed. I mean, you can barely see him. Maybe, I mean, it's quite an interesting point you make. Is he invisible because death is kind of invisible? Death is with us, but we don't know that he's there. We don't acknowledge that he's there. So is that a symbolic device, right? Anyway, let's continue. Robbie Robin says, poor Joe as well. She was happy with Theo. I must say, Robbie, thanks so much for making the effort to be. I know you on UK time. Like me, you had a little sleep before coming on. I appreciate it. Yeah, it definitely does. It definitely does. And this whole theme also comes up a little bit in Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. What can you do, given our predicament? What can you do? And the end of the movie addresses that. Is there anyone here that's recently watched Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind? Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. I also might need to get a coffee. I definitely might need to get a coffee. Okay, let us continue. Let's just go out of here. Can you see how I doubt it was painted in that neon color? So this is what he says. Two studies of cypresses of that difficult bottle green hue. I've worked their foregrounds with thick layers of white lead, which gives firmness to the ground. I think that very often the Monticellis were prepared like this. You put other colors on that, but I do not know if the canvases are strong enough for that sort of work. speaking of Gauguin and Bernard, and that they may well give us painting of greater consolation. And you remember that is exactly what we spoke about during Van Gogh Letters 84, where we said, what is he trying to communicate? What is he trying to communicate in this painting? And does he succeed? And the answer is consolation. Van Gogh is trying to communicate through Starry Night a sentiment, which is consolation. He's, like I said, he is in a way going through a proxy experience for the whole of mankind in a way, kind of like Jesus. And he feels he's in need of consolation just like the world is. So what is consolation? Well, it's exactly what we know it to be. Consolation is to be comforted, to feel solace, to have sympathy and compassion, pity, commiseration, right? That's what he's trying to communicate. And what is so incredible is he does seem to communicate that, which is why that painting is such a bestseller, which why that painting is so famous, because the world does need consolation. Think about true crime. There's so much blaming, finger pointing, this, that, and whatever. But inside all of that, we are all wounded, hurting, anxious, scared, uncertain people. And what we really need is consolation, right? Okay. Anyone here on Patreon listen to that song that I put up called The Stable Story? I think it's called The Stable Story. Did anyone see that? I know maybe a couple of you did. I know Chelsea saw it. I know one or two others saw it. Chelsea did. Anyone else here? Anyone else? So if you're on Patreon, after your homework after this live stream is to go to Patreon and to listen to that song again, but this time bearing the following in mind. Well, to watch these, read the lyrics. So remind me at the end of this live to reread these lyrics to you. Starts, remember when our songs were just like prayers, like gospel hymns that you caught in the air. Come down, sweet reverence, unto my simple house and ring, and ring. Ring like silver, ring like gold, ring out those ghosts on the Ohio. Ring like clear day wedding bells. Were we the belly of the beast or the sword that fell? We'll never tell. Oh, come to me clear and cold on some sea, watch the world spin in waves, mad machine. So just remind me to return to that. I thought I was going to deal with it now, but I'll rather come back to it. The name of this song is it's called The Stable Song by Gregory Alan Isakov. He's actually a South African who's living in Colorado at the moment. So make sure you give it a listen. I think he's actually living in Boulder, Colorado. So anyway, let's continue. So he's talking about Gauguin giving us a painting of greater consolation. And although those just seem like words on paper, it's actually a phenomenal theme and a phenomenal idea. He goes on to say, I must, however, add what I've also said many a time to Gauguin himself. In other words, he's saying that he communicated this in person to Gauguin. He said, we must not forget that others have done it already, meaning others have executed these kind of masterworks, if I can put it that way. Is masterworks the right word? Master, can't quite think of the word, but basically um, what's the word for it's a word that begins with masterpiece. I can't believe I couldn't think of it. He's basically saying others have executed masterpieces. That's it. And so it's been done before, right? Then he goes on to say, but however it may be, outside Paris, you quickly forget Paris. When throwing yourself into the heart of the country, your ideas change. But I, for one, cannot forget all those lovely canvases of Barbizon, and it seems hardly probable that anyone will do better than that, and unnecessary besides. So what he's really saying is, I don't know whether we can compete with those masterpieces. And as a writer, I know that feeling. I know when I started writing books, just thinking, well, what can I say? What can I do? When I wrote books on John Benet Ramsey, I thought, what can I possibly contribute that hasn't already been said or done? How can I compete with Perfect Murder, Perfect Town, and so on and so on? That's kind of how he's feeling. He goes on to say, what is Andre Bonga doing? That's Joe's brother. You have not mentioned him in the last 2 or 3 letters. As for me, my health remains very good and work distracts me. You can imagine work certainly is distracting him. He's really hitting his stride in terms of his work. In fact, he's done really, really well having moved home to the asylum. He's very quickly got himself set up and is hitting his stride, in this really horrible location. I don't know how many artists or writers could sort of translocate and then get into that state of flow this quickly with people screaming and everything going on around him. He says, I've received probably from one of our sisters a book by Rod, which is not bad, but the title, Les Sons de la Vie, is really a little pretentious for the contents. It certainly is not very cheering. I think the author must be suffering a good deal from his lungs. And so he's reading a book and he's saying, wow, this book's pretty depressing. I'm not sure if I want to read much more of it. He's also saying the book's a bit pretentious. Now, I don't mean to be funny, but I ordered this book because Stephen King gave it a huge endorsement on X. I was just scrolling through X and he was saying, wow, that's an excellent book. And you can see I'm not very far through it. I've just started. But it's got these this feedback. Finely honed, terrifically entertaining stuff, superb and ingenious whodunit. One of the crime's most engaging duos. Strike and Robin are just as magnetic as ever. Superb and ingenious whodunit. A page turner that will keep you up all night. Galbraith is fluent in invention of incident, characters, conversation, confrontations. A rip-roaring read. A big, sprawling, at times electrifying thriller. It just goes on. And I have to say, I don't get it. I'm struggling to read each page. It's kind of about a cult and then the detective going to investigate the cult. And we've obviously dealt with real cults, and it's quite hard to take fiction seriously. Maybe that's what's going on. But maybe this is like Starry Night. Maybe this book is like something incredible and you just can't see it. You just don't see it for whatever reason. But I felt that as well. I've written books where when I've hit publish, I've literally thought your whole life's about to change. Like this was incredible. In other words, the experience writing it was so moving and so meaningful. I thought, wow, the fact that I actually delivered this is incredible. And then what happened? Nothing. And some of those are my worst selling books, were even worst reviewed books. I'm not going to mention them right here. Well, I'll mention one of them. Slaughter, I think, is by far one of my best achievements, and people couldn't give a shit about it. And maybe there's a lot wrong with it, but I know when I wrote it, I thought that I was doing incredible work, some of the hardest work that I'd ever done, and then nothing happens. No one reads it. You get no feedback. And it was after Slaughter that I actually wrote The Murder of Vincent van Gogh. And although I got some positive feedback, basically the same response. Mm, okay, I guess that's your idea, kind of thing. Um, and so that is exactly what Van Gogh's that place that he's in right now, which is um, I think he's pretty happy with what he's doing, but there's just no positive feedback around him. And I'm not saying that um, that's anybody's fault. That's often just how life goes. You don't you don't necessarily get credit when it's due, and a lot of people get credit when it's not due. Um, Look at where the world is today with the Biden-Trump debate. What do people want the one contender to um, leave the race? Um, Life isn't always fair. That's just the way it is. I'm just trying to share with you the feeling Van Gogh must be going through, which is and he kind of was in this place before. Before Gauguin arrived, he was also painting really, really well, and then he lost that momentum. Well, he's about to experience the exact same thing. He's painting really, really well now, but he's in an environment that's not going to really support that. And I don't mean that he needs complimenters and flatterers. I just mean is not in the best place to be concentrating and painting. Is in a madhouse. People are screaming. You'll see in a moment he talks about cockroaches in your food's not the worst thing in the world. Well, I don't know. I don't know if I could settle down after finding cockroaches in my food. Settle down and paint. Um, in a cohesive way, right? So anyway, let's get back to this. Um, then he says, so you can see from that statement where he says it certainly is not very cheering. That I think he is feeling a little despondent. Who wouldn't be? He's not, and he's going to bring it up quite soon. He's not really getting frequent letters from Theo because guess what Theo is doing? Theo is pinching trying to think of what do they call it? In Afrikaans, they talk about a knyp in die donker, which means pinching someone in the dark. That's what Theo and Joe are up to. Theo and Joe are enjoying the birds and the bees, and Vincent, in a way, couldn't be further from their thoughts or their hearts because they are, and you can't blame them. They've just gotten married, they're in love, and it's actually important that they have these experiences. But it's pretty bad luck for Vincent that this is happening now, right? So there's another one that he paints, cypresses. What do you think? We've spoken about the fact that wheat and the reaper are symbols of death and mortality, death and humanity. What do you think a cypress symbolizes? Because he's suddenly painting cypresses. He painted a huge one in Starry Night. This is kind of the first time that cypresses are sort of entering his archive. Like when he was in All, he didn't really paint cypresses. He was painting peach trees and blossoms, and now he's painting cypresses and huge cypresses that reach out into the sky. I mean, look at this, right? What do you think he's communicating? Cypresses also represent death. Zircon says it reminds me of a flame. It's not quite the same. I wouldn't say it represents death, but it certainly has a eternal aspect to it. It represents eternity in a sense. You often have cypresses planted alongside graveyards. That they sort of have quite a a regal look to them, right? So we have it here. In classical antiquity, the cypress was a symbol of mourning, right? And so you can see it kind of is. You can say it symbolizes death, or it basically is associated with mortality as well. So you can see where Van Gogh's thoughts actually are lying, right? So if you combine the cypresses with the wheat fields, you can see that he's really is thinking about his own mortality. He is aware that he's got possibly a terminal sickness, and he's, in a way, he's lost his freedom as well. What does Mel Stiller say? I don't see where you said that, but anyway. So anyway, he's now painting quite a lot of cypresses. There's cypresses, right? It's now becoming a theme. And he is in need of being cheered up, but nothing is really cheering up. He says, and he's also talking about consolation. So he's painting about these themes of death and to some extent resurrection, mourning, and he's also talking quite a lot about consolation because he needs consolation. He's feeling like actually that he needs a little bit of sympathy. He won't openly say it. He won't say, wow, I can't believe, I'm in this situation, blah, blah, blah. If anything, he's basically saying, don't feel sorry for me. But at the end of the day, he does feel a little in need of some human warmth, I would say. Who wouldn't, right? Then he says, he's talking about the book now and the author. He says he admits that he finds consolation in the companionship of his wife, which is all to the good. But after all, for my own use, he teaches me nothing about the meaning of life, whatever is meant by it. And this is actually showing you, this is demonstrating what a intelligent artist we're dealing with. He reads another book and he says, well, this is actually garbage. This guy doesn't know what consolation is. This is very superficial. And it's only an artist that can look at that and is right to have that contempt, because, when something is that superficial, that shallow, then it really is kind of worthless in terms of this conversation, right? Are you guys following? Well, it's also not. Yeah, I mean, it's. Oh, did you mention death in the beginning? It's not a pleasant subject because it's not pleasant subject matter, right? But the point is that within the subject matter, anyone is going to feel, well, I need a little bit of consolation here, right? And that's exactly what he's talking about. So he goes on to say, for my part, I might well think him a little trite and be surprised that he has had a book like that published these days and it gets sold at 3 francs 50. And so a little bit of scorn for a fellow artist. Obviously, it's a writer, and basically saying, well, I don't really know what the big deal is about this guy. Well, I think this book's overpriced. Then he says, I prefer Alphonse Kerr, Sylvester, and Droz because they are a bit more alive than this. It's true that I'm perhaps ungrateful and not even appreciating Abbé Constantine and other literary works, which give luster to the gentle reign of the naive Carnot. It seems like this book has made a great impression on our good sisters. At least Will has mentioned it to me, but good women and books are two different things. Okay. So you can, in a way, understand why Van Gogh would find this not terribly interesting, because it's about someone finding consolation in the companionship of his wife. Now, you'd think a woman would like that story, that you can, that this almost cerebral desire, that, or not, desire is definitely the wrong word, the cerebral need that we all have can be achieved um, through a woman, but not really a woman, a wife, right? Um, Almost in the sexual sense, the way the breast represents nourishment. Ernest Becker would talk about getting psychological nourishment. A child gets also psychological nourishment through its mother's milk, right? It's kind of a similar thing, getting a kind of nourishment, but psychological nourishment through not through your relationship with your wife, through the feminine, right? And you can understand how a woman would quite like that idea. But for Van Gogh, that's not really helping him. He's not, that's not on the cards for him. And if anything, it's a reminder that Theo has something that he doesn't have. And so it's probably because of that that it's it's actually triggering him, because he's talking about it uh, at some length. He's obviously not happy with this writer, because something that was supposed to console him has actually triggered him in a way, right? Quite interesting. And now we go on to, he says, so he said, good women and good books are two different things. I've reread with much pleasure Zadig Ola Destiné by Voltaire. And he says it is like Candide. Yeah, the mighty author gives at least a glimpse of the possibility that life may have some meaning. Now, think about those words. That is exactly what he does want to hear. He wants to know that although his life is running out, there is some meaning still to his existence. Although he feels that his circumstances have become a lot more limited, he still wants to believe in possibilities, right? That is a lot of what Starry Night's about, is kind of the consolation of possibility, the consolation of hope. And so he says here, the mighty author gives at least a glimpse of the possibility that life may have some meaning, though it is agreed in conversation that things in this world do not always go as the wisest wish. As for me, so now he's getting personal, I do not know what to wish. To work here or elsewhere now seems to come to very much the same thing, and being here, staying here, seems the simplest thing to do. Can you see how he's really resigned? He's really become quite fatalistic. And anyone in his situation would be. He's basically in a prison, and not a very pleasant prison either. He's in a place that's almost like a symbolic purgatory. He didn't commit any crime. He isn't actually mad, and yet he's in a situation that is like a prison, and he's like a madman in a madhouse being tormented by other mad people. And it's almost like, okay, now's your chance to go mad. And that's also what's quite incredible, is he needs to resist these horrible negative forces around him. And so he says, whether I'm here or anywhere else, does it really matter? And you would imagine most people in that situation would say, yes, it does. I'd rather not be here. I'd rather be in the yellow house. I'd rather be a soldier. I'd rather be anywhere except here. And at this point already, he's basically saying, does it really matter if I'm here or anywhere else? This is reality. Yeah, I mean, but the fact that he's basically resigned to it tells you a lot about what's going on. So then he says, only I have no news to tell you, for the days are all the same. I have no ideas. That's also quite a huge statement given what he's just done. except to think, and look at what he says here. He says, I have no ideas except to think that a field of wheat or a cypress is well worth the trouble of looking at close up, and so on. I mean, that is a very mild way of saying I'm thinking about fields of wheat and cypress trees um, in a symbolic sense, and obviously in a deeply symbolic sense, and in a very solemn sense, right? Yeah, I mean, that's basically it. So, Bruni, there's a point where being limited and adversity is good for you. And of course, there's a point where stress is good for us. And then there's a point where it's not. I mean, think about Elvis Presley. He was a certain kind of artist to a point, and then he didn't really then he didn't really do anything after that. You know, when he lived in Graceland, when he stayed in Vegas, there's a point where not having any stress is not really very good. Okay, so now he goes on to say, I have a wheat field very yellow and very light, perhaps the lightest canvas I've done. That should also tell you something. That he says, perhaps the lightest canvas I've done. Starry Night is quite dark in a way. You know, the landscape is what do you call it? The landscape is nocturnal, and so he's thinking in these major themes as well, light and dark, right? Let's have a quick look at the poll again. Still, only 6%, the least amount of people got that answer right. 5%, 19 votes. Okay. Anyway, let's continue. Then he says, the cypresses are always occupying my thoughts. So he's in a way developing a obsession with these trees. And I must say, when I when I cycled to Saint-Remy, I really noticed the cypresses. In fact, if you remember the picture that I showed you guys of the bicycle, those trees in the background are cypresses, and there are a heck of a lot of them. It's like a forest of cypresses. Let's see if I can quickly bring that back. I actually did some house cleaning here, just in terms of my image archive. I just don't see it. Let's have a look. There it is. Just give me a second. Why can't I see it? Well, you guys might as well look at what I'm looking at. Trying to find that picture. But this is the graveyard in all, and I'm not sure if these are cypresses. Can't quite make them out. But that's not really what I'm looking for. I'm looking for the bicycle that's on the ground in the foreground. Don't quite see them. I think this is what I got from Krolamola. This is the picture you see in the background here. Let's just take it off screen. Can I? The picture you see in the background here, as far as I remember, this picture that I took is from that picture. Just have a look here. If you look at this part here, or is it? Actually, it might not be. But anyway, just have a look at it anyway. That's from a painting that he did of cypresses, and that's also. Look at that impasto, how thick it is. Now, impasto paintings take quite a long time to dry. Just look at the. Now, if you think about cypresses representing death or mortality or eternity, look at the contrast of that darkness and the light. Is that what he's trying to communicate, right? I still can't find that picture that I'm looking for. Very frustrating. Somewhere here. I thought there it is, hiding away. So in the background there, you see cypresses. Those are all cypresses. And so it's no wonder that Van Gogh noticed them, because there are cypresses all over Saint-Remy. And he must have kind of felt an odd sense of, again, fatalism. If you believe if you see things and you accept the symbolism of things, then, he's in Saint-Remy and there's cypresses all over the place. He's going to start wondering, wow, is this actually a graveyard? Like where I am, is it actually a kind of graveyard for me? Right? And again, think about, he's just painting his best painting. His paintings are going to change the world. Meanwhile, he's walking around feeling like he's kind of in a cemetery, not only inside the asylum where people are sick and dying and going mad, but he's also outside. Although it's beautiful, the cypresses all over. He must feel like he's in a kind of a nightmare, that his brother's kind of in this paradise, his brother's married, his brother's having a rip-roaring time, and he's quietly walking through the sort of purgatory between heaven and hell, but also between life and death. Like he's just in transit before he's about to die, which in a way that is exactly where he was. Right? It's actually pretty chilling. I think Stephanie, are you still here? I think Stephanie said she finds the cypresses beautiful or something. I just want to. She says they seem vibrant to me. Real cypresses aren't very vibrant. They are quite dark. They're almost black trees. In terms of trees, they are not terribly vibrant. I'm not saying his art isn't. Certainly, he paints cypresses in quite a vibrant way. I'm just saying the reality of a cypress is solemn, dark, kind of foreboding in a way, and yeah, kind of mournful. It's kind of not a happy tree, right? Do you follow? Okay, shall we go back to the letter? I'm glad I found this. I can't actually remember if I if I photographed this at Krolamola or in New York. I guess if I just check the metadata, I can confirm that. Let's go to this. Oh, so this was Krolamola. So yeah, so I think that photo is from the actual painting that you saw on screen. Okay. Let's get back to the letter. So there you have it. The cypresses are always occupying my thoughts. Now, don't you guys feel isn't it nice to talk about this stuff and then you've actually got somebody who's gone there and I can show you photos and you can really bring it to life, right? Now, I'd really like to go back to Saint Remy and because I actually passed through there incredibly quickly. I was on my bike, stopped, took some photos, didn't even have a coffee. And I'd like to, the next time I go through there, maybe even spend the night or a couple of nights, just soak it in. But don't you guys get a sense that, wow, you know what you're talking about because you were actually there? You actually saw the cypresses, um, you know? And that's the other part that's kind of weird is you don't really see those cypresses in all. You see them in San Jaime. It's just really over the mountain. Anyway, he goes on to say, the cypresses are always occupying my thoughts. I should like to make something of them like the canvases of the sunflowers. So he wants to make the cypresses into kind of a running theme. And now is really a good time. I mean, that's really where his thoughts are dwelling. He says, it astonishes me that I've not yet, it astonishes me that they have not yet been done as I see them. So he is kind of inspired to paint them, right? So Yvonne says there are a lot of cypresses in my neighborhood. They are good hedge trees. You often do see them right side by side, and they can form like a kind of a boundary, and they're very famous in Italy. They give a very regal appearance to estates sometimes. Um, but you can't imagine a little kid climbing up a cypress tree the way that you would climb up an apple tree. By the way, the apple tree outside has got virtually no leaves left. The peach tree still got a couple of green leaves that are dangling in the last bits of sunlight. Then he says, it is as beautiful of line and proportion as an Egyptian obelisk, and the green has a quality of such distinction. What eloquence! How well expressed is that? Um, yeah, so they I don't know if they grow that easily in the northeast, where Yvonne is quite arid, and where Van Gogh is not arid, but it's certainly on the dry side. I do think they tend to prefer that. And then he says, it is a splash of black in a sunny landscape. Again, what an incredible poet he is, because that's exactly what he's trying to convey, right? Um, the presence of death in the splash of life. And he calls the death the splash. And he says, it is one of the most interesting black notes and the most difficult to hit off exactly that I can imagine. But then you must see them against the blue, in the blue rather, to paint nature here as everywhere. You must be in it a long time. Thus, a Montanard does not give me the true intimate note, for the light is mysterious. The Monticelli and the Delacroix felt that. Now, I don't know about you, but when I read this, you get a sense that he's so much on his game. You know, he's taking the Starry Night craft now into the theme of cypresses, and it's one of his best themes. He's also taking the Starry Night craft, that craftsmanship, that expertise, that mastery into these themes, right? Okay, then he goes on to say, then Pissarro used to talk very well about it in the old days, and I'm still a long way from being able to do what he said would have to be done. It would, of course, be a pleasure to me if you sent me the paints, if possible, soon. But above all, do only what you can do without too much worry. So if you would rather send me to me at two different times, will do just as well. And then there's some sketches. He's sketching the cypresses in his letters to his brother. So it's not like he's just talking. He goes to the trouble to sketch it to Theo. But what is Theo preoccupied with? Not death and mortality and mourning, but he's in the throes of passion, right? He goes on to say, I think that of the two canvases of cypresses, the one I'm making, the one I'm making the sketch of will be the best. The trees in it are very big and massive. They are indeed. Another thing about cypresses is they can get really, really old. They can outlive most other trees. And so another thing about them is they are resilient, aren't they? And then he says, bring that back. He says, um, the foreground very low with brambles and brushwood, behind some violent hills, violet hills. It shows you I'm a true crime person. When I see that, I see violet. Violet hills, a sky green and pink with a crescent moon. The foreground especially is painted very thick, clumps of brambles with touches of yellow, violet, and green. So although he's seeing the abundance of nature, he's seeing summer basically bubbling out of the landscape. I think he's also thinking about is emotional. I think what's also going on here is emotions. Don't you agree? In all of this are his own emotions. In the sky that you see in the background are emotions. And I have to say, looking at that, for an artist to paint the sky in such a energetic way, like another artist would just make it like a blank blue, but he fills the sky with electricity, with emotion, with gravitas even. The sky is kind of a burden. The sky is a kind of conscience that sort of at the background of all things, and a conscience that resonates with him, right? What think of it just as a such a simple but powerful theme, a tree reaching out of the ground into the sky, and behind the tree, the sky that is just there and seems indifferent in some ways. And in other times, not. The sky rains, the sky seems angry, all that kind of thing. I mean, just in that theme, there's so much that can kind of speak to us. I must say, when I look out my kitchen window and I see the peach tree, and I see how much it's grown, but how far its branches go into the sky. But it's a winter sky, and there's some final leaves. Right now is the middle of winter. We're about to have our coldest temperatures probably for the whole year. Will probably be tomorrow and the next day, maybe a couple of days after that. Um, and yet there's still some leaves clinging to that peach tree, and I'm pretty sure by next week they'll be gone. There won't be a single leaf left on that tree. But just that picture, that image, that's a painting as well. This holding on to, um, you know, capture the last. It's almost like sucking the marrow out of life, getting that last little bit of antiseptic sunshine. Trying to absorb that out of the sky, a sky that is not meant to be nourishing. It's the midwinter sky, and it's not the time for a peach tree to be doing that. A peach tree needs to go to sleep in winter. So I'm just saying, just the theme of a tree and the sky is a pretty powerful theme to explore on its own. It's quite, in terms of speaking to the human condition as well, right? I mean, you get stunted trees. I think one of Brian Laundrie's last photos was of a kind of a stunted tree at night in the desert. You get giant trees. You get trees that are bent by the wind. You get spectacular trees, and then you get consoling forests and beautiful park-like settings framed by trees. And so trees and the settings that they are in really do, in a way, speak to us, in a very simple but effective way. And that's what he's keying into. Then he says, I will send you drawings of it with two other drawings that I've done too. That will keep me busy these days. The great question here is to find occupation for the day. So, you can imagine how horrible it is being where he is. He's trying to be distracted as well. Now, he's not trying to find the answer to life, the universe, and everything, just that. He's also just trying to keep sane because he's not in a very nice environment, right? Well said. And I mean, in a way, I think our fates are actually tied to trees. If the Amazon continues to be destroyed, we will be destroyed, because the Amazon is like the world's giant air conditioner. Yeah, I mean, it literally uh, gives us air to breathe, right? It really is that essential. Anyway, it goes on to say, what a pity one cannot shift this building here. It would be splendid to hold an exhibition in it, all the empty rooms, the large windows. So, can you see, in the same way that there's something mournful about a Cyprus, there's something mournful about his situation, where he's thinking, wow, this is such a cool building, you could have an exhibition in it, but that's not going to happen. And he is also in a mournful situation. He's in this asylum while this great fair is taking place in Paris. Then he says, by the way, the Olympics are in Paris this year, which is why the Tour de France isn't ending there this year. Then he says, and this is really important. This is really, really important. He says, I should have very much liked to see that picture by Rembrandt, which you spoke of in your last letter, right? Now, do you remember what we said about the Annunciation of the Shepherds? And didn't that have a big role in Starry Night? And it certainly seems as though it did. Well, let's go quickly to that sketch. This is the letter from Theo, which basically led to Starry Night, this letter. And he talks about, there it is. The other day, a sketch by Rembrandt was sold at a public auction. I wish you could have seen it. It is the figure of the angel Gabriel standing, as he is in the heaven of his etching, the Annunciation of the Shepherds. What a marvel! The colors remain quite clear. Perhaps originally it was all yellow. The shadows were much more colored than it was his habit, and were probably a very pronounced blue, green, and violet. But the general effect and the harmony are exquisite. And he's talking about. Um, I wonder if I can get the actual Rembrandt Annunciation of, because I think what I showed you guys was the sketch. Rembrandt. I mean, I don't know whether, did he do it in color ever? Anyway, this is what he's talking about. I mean, you guys saw it previously. I just don't understand how he's talking about colors like, um, well, he says probably a very pronounced blue, green, and violet, because it's a sketch. So maybe he's talking about what the actual painting looked like. But anyway, it's this picture. Now look at what you're seeing over there and what you're seeing over here. This is a tree here, and you see all of these fireworks in the sky. Look at that as well. Look at that sort of aura going on in it, like a circle, and what you see with Starry Night, right? Um, and I mean, we went through the whole Annunciation of the Shepherds thing. You'd imagine that Van Gogh would be very aware of what that is, because his father was a pastor. You'd imagine if you mentioned the Annunciation of the Shepherds to Van Gogh, that he would have a very clear vision of it based on his own education. And you may remember we went through it last time. I'm going to go through it very quickly now. All these depictions of it. There's the Rembrandt. There's that. All in every instance, you've got a tree, sky kind of on fire, and then people and houses that are quite small in the background. I mean, look at this one. You can barely make out. Looks like a little bit of urban fabric or village in the background there. There's a little, might be a stable. Yeah, it is a stable. Same thing, tree, a little bit of a rural fabric, maybe a stable over there. Sky dominates, the sky's on fire. Again, same thing, trees. Yeah, I must say the landscape is very elevated, but trees, sky, things going on at the bottom. Trees, sky, the land being quite small and nocturnal, and so on, right? Trees in every execution, you see the trees. That's quite a different. Yeah, you don't really see the sky as much, although the angel does have wings. There you've got some wheat in the foreground, something in a basket, maybe a piece of fruit or something. There you've got a comet literally in this. This is 1902. So yeah, you've got a comet literally being acknowledged, that you have these sorts of celestial bodies, in the heavens. But the point I'm trying to get at is, obviously, what Theo said really made an impression on him, and then he painted Starry Night, right? And if he had never seen Rembrandt's Annunciation of the Shepherds, was he imagining it? Now, I don't know what the answer is to that. I don't know whether he would have seen it or could have seen it. But what if he just took Theo's description at face value? Listen to what he says. What a marvel. He says, the angel Gabriel is in heaven, right? He talks about the angel Gabriel standing in heaven. What a marvel. The color has remained quite clear. He says, originally maybe it was all yellow. The shadows were much more colored than was his habit. So he's saying there's much more color in the shadows. He says, very pronounced blue, green, and violet. And then he talks about, he finalizes by saying, the harmony are exquisite. Right? And you can imagine that this would really land with Vincent at this point, because it's his own brother whom he respects and who knows the art market, saying, this piece sold and people loved it and I loved it, and he calls it a marvel. You can imagine Vincent going, I'm not really selling my art and I really want to do something special. And of course, Rembrandt's a Dutch artist, one of the great Dutch artists. When I was in Amsterdam, I literally passed the Van Rijn Museum, artworks by Rembrandt, on the way to the Van Gogh Museum. And so he's a massive figure in Dutch art. And so his brother is just saying how awesome this painting was. And did Van Gogh remember it, or did he imagine it? Either way, I think it's quite incredible, quite an incredible thing to think how Starry Night came about. But certainly this was a big part of it. Theo mentioning this particular painting, because that is exactly what the enunciation of the shepherds is consolation. It's saying to humanity, hey guys, God is sending his son. A child will be born in the world that will save all of you. I mean, it's not the epiphany, it's the epitome of consolation that a God exists, God cares, God is sending basically a superman, a super being, is sending his son who's going to sort everything out for you guys. And it's just the fact that the angel is there saying, God actually does care about you. God is going to do something about what's going on. And he's not sending a child to a huge cathedral in Paris or wherever in Rome. This child will be born in a barn and will be close to nature and close to simple people and animals. Remember, if God made the world and God made nature, then a barn kind of makes sense because God also cares about the creatures that he made besides us, right? God didn't just make the world and put people in it and said, I only care about people. The dogs, cats, trees, forget about it. We just want to, if you think about it, that is how we treat our world. As a kind of inheritance to squander. So anyway, I actually shouldn't jump out of this letter yet. So he says, I should very much have liked to have seen that picture by Rembrandt, which you spoke of. Then he says, some time ago I saw in Braun's window a photo of a picture which must belong to the fine last period, probably in the Hermitage series. In this were great figures of angels. It was Abraham's meat, 5 figures, I think. That was extraordinary too, as moving as the men of Emmaus, for instance. So he does know about this sort of thing. Now, to me, that's not terribly inspiring. But Van Gogh does have his own archive and his own memory of paintings. If later on there should ever be a question of giving something to Monsieur Sauls for the trouble he has taken, we should give him Rembrandt's Men of Emmaus. Is your health good? A handshake for you and your wife. I hope to send you some drawings next week. Ever yours, Vincent. And that brings us to the end of June. Middle of June is when he painted Starry Night. And now look at what happens. We've gone from the 18th of June to a week later to another week later, and now he's writing to Wilhelmina. Why? Because he's not hearing from Theo. So let's deal with this letter. My dear sister, some days ago now I started writing another letter in reply to yours, but I discovered that I was not sufficiently master of my head to be able to write. So he was having a bit of an off day. I thank you, Annelise, for the book by Rod, which I've read and which I shall return to you soon. The terrifying title, L'essence de la vie, scared me a little. I wonder what that means. Does anyone know what that means? Let's see if we can get a translation here. It means the meaning of life. Okay. Yeah, well, no wonder he felt a bit shortchanged by whatever he read. Just reading some of your comments. Anyway, there's one or two that I want to respond to, but I'm not going to. So yeah, he calls it a terrifying title. He says it scared me a little, but seeing that the subject is fortunately hardly discussed in the book, I much enjoyed reading something which bears a family resemblance to Le Philosophie, Sur les Toits by Sylvestre, or to Monsieur, Madame et, sorry, I can't read French. The moral of the story is that under certain circumstances, a gentleman prefers ultimately to live with a sweet and very devoted wife and his child, rather than to live in the restaurants and cafes of the boulevards, a life he had led before without committing too many excesses. This is undoubtedly very nice. It is remarkable that the good Madame de Quesnay's illness came to an unexpected end after all. Nevertheless, it must have been a day of blessed deliverance for her. If you say in your letter that as you observe so many other people who try to make their way in life, they seem to be making more progress, coming and going than you. Oh well. So I just want to slow down on that. As you observe so many other people who try to make their way in life, they seem to be making more progress. What shall I say to that? I must say, I have experienced that in my life quite a lot. Don't know if you guys have, and to some extent, I am experiencing that. Although it doesn't really bother me. I'm aware of it. I don't like it, but it doesn't really bother me. But in other words, you see other people around you that are doing much better than you are, and then you say, well, what do I say about that? And I think I was driving in Myrtle Beach with some friends of mine, and I said, I'm actually pretty happy with my life. If you want to be unhappy, compare yourself to others. It's a recipe for misery, and especially keep comparing yourself unfavorably to others. And he says, I myself occasionally have a feeling of stupefaction when I look at my own life, and for that matter, at the lives of so many other workers in my profession today. And so he doesn't really go into that, but I think what he's saying is other artists are doing well, and I just don't really understand it. But he doesn't actually dwell on it, to his credit. He just says, I'm stupefied. Then he says, today I sent Theo a dozen drawings after canvases um, I'm working on. Otherwise, my life is definitely as inept as it was when I was a 12-year-old boy at boarding school. You can see he's got a bit of a self-deprecating sense of humor when he speaks to his sister. He says, wow, I learned absolutely nothing. I was a stubborn-minded kid, right? And in a way, I think he's saying, I still am. Then he says, an enormous number of painters who would decidedly not be able to do my 12 canvases, right? And you know what he's saying there? Is he's basically saying, I'm better than these guys. He's saying, an enormous number of painters out there couldn't hold a candle to me. And I mean, I don't want to be funny, but well, let me take it a step back. Let me take it a step back. Is he wrong? Is he wrong to say that? He says an enormous number of painters wouldn't be able to do my 12 canvases, right? And I guess the rest of that sentence is also important to note. He says, talking about in speed, saying in 2 months or in 12 months, he's basically saying if they took a whole year to paint it, they wouldn't be able to do it. He says, and they're now living in town or in the country, and they are looked up to as artists as well as intelligent people, right? But no, but the point I'm trying to get at is, do you think it's true that? Do you think he's being arrogant, or do you think what he's saying is actually true? Yeah, thanks for that, Robbie Robin. But do you see what I'm getting at? Do you think he's being arrogant, or do you think what he's saying is objectively and subjectively true, right? Because if you think about it, he's just fucking painted Starry Night, right? Starry Night is going to be one of the biggest paintings in human history. And he says, you know what? An enormous number of painters can't do what I'm doing. Well, he's absolutely right. is absolutely right. But anyone reading this now would go, yeah, well, you know. And so if he says it, it doesn't really mean anything. If the artist says about his own work, it doesn't really mean anything. But actually, it does. Actually, it does mean something. And an artist who doesn't defend their art and say, well, is this right? Does this make sense? Does it make sense that I'm doing this and other people are doing that, and the people around them, the audience, are, how do they put it? Sucking it up, or what's that saying? Drinking it up, lapping it up. He's kind of just stupefied by, in a way, the whole art crowd, the artists and the people that idolize them, and it's just like, I don't get it. That they're not really very intelligent. What's going on, right? And then he says, but believe me, I say this in order to explain my meaning, and not because I want to give expression to the urgency or possibility or desire on my part to change things. He's saying, be that as it may, I don't want to change it. That's just the way things are. He says, you know what? We hardly know life. We know so little of its foundation. And besides, we are living in a period in which everybody seems to be talking, raving nonsense, and everything seems to be in a tottering state, so that it cannot be called being unhappy if we have found a duty that forces us to remain quietly in our corner, busy with our modest work, which is simpler than that imposed by certain other duties whose existence also makes sense. And I don't know, like you read this and you think, wow, not much has changed in 130 years, right? He says, everybody seems to be talking, raving nonsense. And he says, everything seems to be in a tottering state. And he says, you know what? Because of this situation, you feel like you're forced to remain in your corner, and you can't actually deal with all that nonsense. So just stick to your thing and don't really worry about it, because you can't really change it, and you are outnumbered by the imbeciles. And so he says, also he says, and he talks about it making sense. He says, having an existence that makes sense as opposed to an existence that doesn't make any sense, an existence that is basically talking, raving nonsense, right? And then he says, in the days we are living through, one runs the risk of returning from a battle ashamed of having fought a battle, right? Now, I don't want to be self-indulgent, but right now, I'm being criticized for um, having or aspiring to authenticity, or this whole idea of authenticity as a virtue. I'm being criticized where people say, yeah, but you can't call yourself the most authentic. I didn't, somebody else did. And I'm repeating that, but it's almost like a symbolic thing. It's like, I'm not saying I am the most authentic. I'm saying what the work that I'm doing is like a voice. It's like I'm not saying I am the most authentic person in true crime. Indirectly, I guess I am, but I'm basically repeating what somebody else said. And I mean, is that voice still speaking authentically about something? When you say voice, we don't necessarily mean the tone of voice. We mean what is being communicated. The voice is saying something. It's not necessarily the voice itself. It's um, the communication, I guess, right? And I couldn't help looking at that criticism and going, sorry, did I miss something? Doesn't authenticity matter? Doesn't authenticity matter to you? Doesn't being kind of a real person in this environment that we're in count for something? Doesn't someone who's trying to tell the truth, although that seems trite, but someone who's sincerely trying to get to the reality of things, um, actually mean something in an environment of liars, manipulators, fraudsters, opportunists, greed mongers, sensationalists, narcissists, all of that. Doesn't one person who's doing that and who wants to do that stand out to you? because the only thing you can get out of that is, I don't like the fact that you think that you're that arrogant. It's like, well, I don't like the fact that you don't seem to see any value in, even if it is arrogant, being arrogantly pushing sincerity and honesty and being genuine and trying to have a real sense of the real world, right? It's like, what is actually wrong with you that you can't see that as being a worthy thing to be doing? And I can't think of a more authentic person than Van Gogh. Um, he sticks to his guns if you think about it, right? Do you know what I'm saying? um, and so he's kind of keying into the exact same spirit right here. He talks about returning from a battle ashamed of having fought a battle, right? But I mean, this whole paragraph really tells you the meat and potatoes of what's also eating at him. You know, he's not just in the asylum, he's there when other artists are doing their thing, and respected and loved and admired, and everything else that goes with it. Look where he is, he's a pariah. And you know, I was having dinner with my family today, and I was just saying, um, you know, how incredible it is. You go to all, and you're there, and I think I've said it to you guys as well. And you know how Van Gogh is a big deal today, but in his time, he was treated like scum. He was kicked out of the town. People scoffed and scorned and laughed and um, sniggered and turned their nose up at his work when he was alive. And look where it is today, and look at the incredible gift that he gave us at his own expense. In a way, he was living in a world that was quite taking sadistic pleasure out of humiliating him, but he nevertheless gave this incredible gift to the world, despite that um, um, whatever you want to call it, opprobrium. And I must say, I feel challenged to have that kind of resilience and that kind of generosity. I don't know if I'm that generous. I don't know if one should be, but I nevertheless really respect him for that. Anyway, he goes on to say, so my friend who was with me at all and some others have organized an exhibition. Wow, that's interesting. Which I should have participated in if I'd been in good health. So there's another reason for him to feel a little chagrined, even a little resentful, maybe even a little bitter. But does it come through? You know, is he complaining and moaning, and you don't really hear him talking about the conditions in the asylum? He doesn't say, "Well, they don't have any air conditioning here, and I've just heard another guy yelling. I can't take this anymore." He says, "Which I should have participated in, but I couldn't." And then he says, "What have they been able to do? Next to nothing. And yet there was something new in their canvases, something good, which gave me pleasure, for instance, and aroused my enthusiasm." So even in this situation where he could have participated in an exhibition, but was excluded due to bad luck, he still has the grace to see uh, not shortcomings, but um, promise or potential or talent in the work of his peers. He is able to look at their work within the context that he's been kicked to the curb and say, wow, I actually see something good in what they've done. It gave me pleasure. It aroused my enthusiasm. And that's pretty incredible. You know, you just feel like, wow, this guy's not capable of bitterness. I would be pretty um, unhappy about that situation. Then he says, among artists, we no longer know what to say to each other. We don't know whether we ought to laugh or to weep at it. And the damnable fact is that we are doing neither one or the other. We are happiest, after all, when we possess a small quantity of paint and canvas, which we lack at times too, and can at least work. Now, I think he's really speaking about himself there, and maybe a couple of other artists. Um, uh, I don't know if there that many artists that can just work without reward and be happy. Do you think so? But all thoughts of a regular life and all thoughts of being able to evoke in ourselves or in others gentle ideas of sensation, all this must of necessity appear purely utopian to us. Look at what he says here. Thoughts of being able to evoke in ourselves or in others gentle ideas or sensations. Do you think he's trying to do that with Starry Night? You think he's trying to evoke gentle sensations? I think that is true to a point that an artist can feel happy lost in his craft. But that's a true artist. I think an artist that never sells his work, I think, is going to feel a little tortured. He goes on to say, and though only yesterday they paid over, so again, he's quite conscious of how other artists are superseding him. He says, only yesterday they paid over 500,000 francs for Malays Angelus. Don't think that more souls will now feel what Malay had in mind, or that middle class people or working men are now going to hang lithographs of this Angelus of Malays in their houses, for instance. Anyone here want to see Malays Angelus? I do. Angelus sounds a bit like Vangelis, doesn't it? I've got to warn you, I'm not going to fall over my feet about this picture. It's got certainly got some subtlety to it. Okay, tell me. So, are you guys ready to see Angelus? Ready? Not what you expected, right? But look at that in the background, that church over there in the background, and the hoe. And look at these hues. This used to be Van Gogh's palette, basically um, uh, excrement brown and mucus green, and bathroom sky, like kind of a bleak, bruised, sunless bathroom sky. Kind of seems somber, doesn't it? Just take myself out of it. Now, although it doesn't seem inspiring, he is inspired by it. He sees in these two figures a deeply symbolic message. And I don't really know whether one of these figures is supposed to be an angel. Let's see what it says here. Angelus is an oil painting by French painter Jean-Francois Millet, completed around about 20 years earlier. The painting, 20, 30 years earlier, the painting depicts two peasants bowing in a field over a basket of potatoes to say a prayer, the Angelus, that together with the ringing of the bell from the church in the background there, right? So they're praying together. Okay, well, that is obvious. And together with the ringing of the bell from the church on the horizon marks the end of a day's work. The Louvre made an extra of the painting on the request of Dali, who was impressed greatly by the contrast. So Salvador Dali is an artist I quite like, asked to have an extra of it, and it said that it appeared that originally, instead of a basket with potatoes, Malay depicted a baby coffin. Wow, that's interesting. Thus, the couple was burying their child. Now, I don't know, that is pretty incredible that even Van Gogh is keying into this. He's got thoughts of mortality. He's got thoughts of, and I mean, a baby is in the offing with Joe. You're going to hear it in the next letter. And so, in a real way, Van Gogh is in a way feeling like he's burying his own child. He's not going to have a life. He's not going to have a future. He's not going to have a family. His art is going to be lost. He's going to be lost, and he maybe feels like he needs consolation for that. And this is also a picture about consolation, that these peasants, although he took that out of it, that they need to be consoled for their lot in life, right? I mean, this is a very beautiful execution, if you think of it, of the theme of consolation. If you wanted to paint consolation, you could do worse than that. And again, look at the sky, how the sky is sort of brightening around them. And it's symbolic. There's also some birds flying in that part of the sky. Think about what is being communicated in this picture through the sky about the beneficence of God, right? Is that the right word? I mean, sometimes I think of a word, but the quality of doing or producing good, the quality of state of being beneficent. I don't know if it's quite the right word, but basically God's grace. That's a much better word. And so when you aware of this, suddenly the picture achieves a much greater power, doesn't it? Then it says, Malay said, the idea for the Angelus came to me because I remembered that my grandmother, hearing the church bell ringing while we were working in the fields, always made us stop to work to say the Angelus prayer for the poor departed. So it definitely is for people that have died. So quite poignant, right? And so Van Gogh is aware of that. And so when Theo spoke about the shepherds, the enunciation of the shepherds, maybe that is also something that he thought about, was this painting. Because we're not really far from, at the time that he mentions this is 2 weeks from Starry Night. Okay, so he goes on to say, Don't think that more souls will now feel what Malay had in mind, or that middle-class people or working men are now going to hang lithographs of Malay in their houses, for instance. But what you can see happening here is he's got a very acute, clear, concise understanding of art. He knows what art is about. He knows what great artists have done. He's trying to do the same thing, but he's also aware that people just don't get him. People don't appreciate what he's trying to do. And he knows what he's trying to do is pretty big, but he's also anyway. Let's go on to the next thing. He's also aware that he's kind of failing, but also that the people around him are failing to see what he's trying to say. So he says, "Don't think that for such a reason those painters who are still at work among the peasants in Brittany should become more encouraged or suffer less under the black need that always tortured Malay, need of courage above all." Well, again, what poetic sentiments, how eloquent is this from the artist? I mean, he could have become a writer himself. Maybe he should have. So look at what he's talking about here. Painters that are at work, thoughts of encouragement in terms of suffering, talks about suffering under the black need that tortured Malay, and then he says the need of courage above all. And that's exactly what Van Gogh is experiencing right now, right? He is in the asylum and he needs all the courage that he can muster. He is alone. He is, but in a way, a prisoner. He's kind of lost his life. He's been thrown out of the town. He's lost his ear. He's lost his friend. He's lost his house. He's lost his dream. And all he's really got left is his art. Each picture that he paints, that's really all that he's got left. All that he's got left is kind of what's in his heart. And kind of in a way, the journey is all that he's got, all that he has left. The how he's evolved as a painter is kind of all that he's got left, and it's kind of an invisible thing because he knows he's changed, he knows he's evolved, he knows he's learned, he knows he's developed, but nobody else really knows that, and he needs courage to sort of say, well, that's okay. In other words, to validate himself. That's very difficult in a madhouse. To think there's any point to painting another picture and painting another picture. And then he goes on to say, alas, we often get out of breath and faith, which is certainly the wrong thing to do, right? He's saying, don't run out of steam, don't lose your faith. But there, now we return to our starting point. If we nevertheless want to go on working, there it is. We have to resign ourselves to the obstinate callousness of the times and to our isolation. There he is. He's not saying, he's not really saying, I don't care. He's kind of trying to say, I'm trying not to care. I do care, but I'm trying not to care. He's not saying that it's no big deal that people are the way they are. He's saying it is what it is. You would resign yourself to, look at those words, the obstinate callousness of the times. I can't help saying that those words, I think, apply to our times, that there's obstinate callousness. Certainly when I get up and work every day, I feel like I'm faced with endless cliffs of obstinate callousness, that I'm outnumbered by an obstinate callousness around us. It's just like a lack of self-awareness that stretches on into eternity. And I just think it's part of the fact that human beings are also animals, that human beings also just want whatever is going to serve their purposes. It's hard for human beings to think beyond themselves as a collective, because we're so used to just going along paths of least resistance. Even when we think we're thinking about others, we're actually thinking about ourselves. And that's what he's referring to. And he also talks about our isolation. And so he's talking about, when he says ourselves, he's talking about himself. He's saying, I have to resign myself to the obstinate callousness of our time. Think about the obstinate callousness of the people of Al. We don't know who you are, but we don't actually want you here. We're not going to try and understand who you are. We just don't want you here. And so he certainly doesn't emerge from Al as a very popular figure. If anything, it's the opposite. An extremely unpopular figure, and extremely misunderstood, and even today is misunderstood. And I would say, when my graphic designer took the book I wrote and peeled away the part where his eyes are, and it put like a picture of Van Gogh's eyes from his own painting behind that, I couldn't help thinking, and it's a thought I've had many times before, if Van Gogh wasn't murdered, then he has nevertheless been murdered in a different way, murdered by the false narrative about Van Gogh. Whatever the narrative is of Van Gogh today, it still isn't the true story. And that is an obstinate callousness of its own, right? So anyway, he says, he talks about we have to resign ourselves also to our isolation. That's also what he's talking about. But he's talking about himself. I've got to resign myself to that, the obstinate callousness, but I must also resign myself to being alone. And I must say, he's really onto something here, because if you can't do that, if you're going to constantly moan and complain and whine and I mean, you'd be totally justified to do that. But if you're going to constantly do that, you're going to go mad, because the only way to get to deal with the situation that he's in is to change it. And he can't change other people, so he's going to have to change himself. And so the only way to do that is to start by resigning himself, accepting it, not complaining and accusing them and prodding them, but to basically say, I can't do anything about you guys, so I'm going to change myself, and I'm going to just deal with the thing I'm in, and get myself out of the situation. I'm going to have to work hard. I'm going to have to work on myself. Um, and I mean, it's quite hard to do that when you're alone and facing walls of obstinate callousness, right? And then he says again, it's sometimes hard to endure. It's hard to endure as living in exile. That's exactly what he's doing. He right now is in exile. What was his crime? What crime did Van Gogh commit that means he deserves to be in exile? And if you think about me and you say, wow, you've got the temerity to want to be authentic, who do you think you are? That's also a kind of exile where even your peers don't ever give you any credit. They pretend you don't exist. They pretend that you've never written a book, or they pretend that the books you have written are just garbage. That's a kind of exile as well. And he's living in a similar kind of exile in terms of other artists, right? And meanwhile, they are making money, and they are in like a collective. Everybody loves them and they're popular, right? And yet what they are selling is basically garbage, right? And that's why he says, I need to have courage above all to deal with this, because it's a daily struggle of being lonely and being, I don't want to say rejected because that sounds quite pathetic, but misunderstood, really. And it's like, guys, can't you see what I'm doing? And the answer is no, I can't understand what you're doing. Anyway, and then he goes on to say, look at where he talks about madness. He says, and so we have to expect after the years that, relatively speaking, we lost, right? We lost poverty, sickness, old age, madness, and always exile. But basically, we have to expect that we've lost, right? And that's our lot in life: poverty, sickness, old age, madness, and being exiled, compared to the other artists that are celebrated, loved, have this warm and fuzzy thing. The communities embrace them. It's quite a thing to endure when you sort of feel, I actually think I know what I'm talking about, and I'm being punished for it. They don't, and they're being rewarded for it. Wow, that's kind of a bit unfair. Anyway, he says, and then he's mentioned this before. He says, yes, certainly this is the moment to say, blessed be Thebe, daughter of Talhui, who never complained of anyone. And so his admonition to himself is, although this may all be true, just try not to complain about it, because you might not be able to stop, right? Just try and rise above all of this. Try and rise above this nonsense, and just enjoy life. As hard as it's been, maybe as unfair as it's been, as much of the injustice of it that's going on, just try and still try and make the most of it, right? And then, yeah, and as Chelsea says, it's all very short-lived. Then he says, wouldn't cherishing the memory of good people be of greater value on the whole than being among the ambitious? I'm now rather absorbed in reading Shakespeare, those words Theo sent me here, where I'm at last quiet enough to be able to engage in a little more difficult reading. So is he trying to build himself up? Is he trying to still edify himself through education? Is there an artist that is more educated on art than Van Gogh? I don't know. Like, I'd love for an art expert to deal with that. Like, can you name me any other artist that worked as an art dealer, whose brother was an art dealer, and who has this level of education in art? Who is he, right? If I say I've written 100 books, is there somebody else that has? Okay, well, who is it? In his case, can you show me another artist anywhere that worked as an art dealer? His brother was an art dealer, and he developed this encyclopedic knowledge of art. And then you would say, wow, what an arrogant prick. He thinks he knows everything. I don't know. It's just pretty crazy. Anyway, he goes on to say, I've started with the historical plays and I've already read Richard II, Richard the fourth, Richard the Fifth, Henry the Fourth. Oh no, that's the. Sorry, I'm just trying to think now. So that's four, five. I guess that's six. Henry the Sixth. For these dreams were the least known to me. Did you ever read King Lear? Well, I must say, if there's anything that's going to get him out of that psychological hole, are the dramas of Shakespeare that's going to minister to him, because certainly Shakespeare also is a consoling and a very intelligent and educational philosopher. So he could do worse than reading Shakespeare. Any of you guys love Shakespeare when you guys were at school? I thought it was brilliant. Shakespeare's criticism of society, Shakespeare's sort of humor at some of the intriguing little plots that people hatch against each other. The color and the symbolism in Shakespeare, just the lyricism as well. But as you say, Shakespeare's no easy read. And I mean, that is certainly one thing that's incredible, is that Shakespeare was so popular and is actually, well, is Shakespeare popular today? And is not that accessible. It's not the most accessible writer. I do think part of the reason he was popular was the plays were acted out in his time. It wasn't just books. They were actually played out, and those performances were what people loved, even if they didn't maybe quite understand them. Hamlet. I'm actually reading an article about Hamlet right now. Anyway, he talks about, never mind, I think I'm not going to urge you too much to read books or dramas, seeing that I myself, after reading them for some time, feel obliged to go out and look at a blade of grass, the branch of a fir tree, an ear of wheat, in order to calm down. It's just, that is so magically put. You know, he says, after I read these dramas, I need to go out and look at a blade of grass to calm down. I sometimes feel the same way. I need to walk my dog. I need to look at, silhouette of a tree to just clear your mind, bring things back to a kind of a simplicity. Anyway, he says, so if you want to do, as the artists do, go look at the red and white poppies with their bluish leaves. And of course, that's another thing. When I was in all, the first thing I saw was red poppies. They were between the railway tracks. They were, when I was walking to my Airbnb, a really extremely crappy Airbnb that kind of smelled like a sewer. I don't know whether my part of the Airbnb was like in a sewer, but there was a ditch and a field next to my Airbnb, and there were lots of red poppies in them. And then, of course, on the other side of Saint-Remy, also just poppies along the roadside, red poppies. And so he says to her, you need to look at the red poppies, their buds soaring on gracefully bent stems. The hours of trouble and strife will know how to find us without our going to look for them. So again, what a beautiful writer, just really incredible. If Van Gogh was just a writer, wow. But I mean, we actually do have books with his writing in. So in a way, he did make it as a writer, right? I mean, look how thick this book is. It's no joke. I mean, compare this book, which is just his letters, to this book, which is someone else's like story of their life. Well, part of it. Okay. Yeah. So he's just saying, you know what? Don't dwell on this stuff. These horrible thoughts are going to find you, even if you don't. And then he talks about something that we don't hear about much: the separation from Cor. Cor is the third Van Gogh, the third Van Gogh brother. who came to South Africa. He actually died not very far from where I'm sitting, less than an hour's drive. Basically, um, Cor was about to leave the family. And if you think about it, Cor doesn't visit his brother either. Cor could, um, come and say hi. Any of the sisters could come say hi, but nobody does. Anyway, he says it is drawing nearer and nearer. So Corey's going to go all the way to South Africa, but he can't go to the south of France to see his brother. He says, what else can one do when we think of all these things we do not know the reason for, then go look at a field of wheat? The history of those plants is like our own. And so there you have it in his own words. He's seeing in wheat fields, the common humanity is seeing his own fate, is seeing our fate in wheat fields, is seeing that in trees as well. Although this is quite a somber topic that we've covered here, certainly compared to the excitement and the flair and the color of Starry Night, haven't you found this like quite a powerful episode as well? Like he's taking us into very deep, powerful, meaningful, but also fascinating territory, right? This is one of his best letters that he's ever written. This one that we're dealing with right now. It's just there's so much that he's got to say, and he's writing it because he's writing it to his sister because for the past 2-3 weeks, Thea hasn't been answering it. This is what he's got in his heart. And anyway, he says, the history of those plants is like our own, for aren't we who live on bread to a considerable extent like wheat? Aren't we, right? Aren't we like wheat? Aren't we to a considerable extent like wheat? And when he says we live on bread, it's almost like he's saying we are what we eat. We are wheat. The wheat is us. That's what feeds us. That's what we are. He's thinking in quite profound ways for someone who, and now he is. If you think about what he said to Theo, he said, "I don't really have any ideas." Well, he's bubbling with ideas, but he's probably saying it to Theo to console Theo, because Theo is saying, "You know what? I don't know if you should be painting. We don't want you to be overly excited." What he says to Bill is totally different. He says, at least aren't we forced to submit to growing like a plant without the power to move? And again, somehow out of the totally sterile circumstances that he's in, I mean, what could be more soul-destroying, self-defeating, um, lonely, traumatic? I'm just trying to think of what it all is. Just debilitating, invalidating, but basically just soul destroying of all the things that he could be feeling, is basically saying, you know what, aren't we a lot like plants? We're forced to submit. We have to grow where we are. We don't have the power to move, just like he doesn't have the power to move, right? And he says, well, then we're forced to submit, and you must just make the most of where you are. Put your toes into the ground and get nourishment out of the soil. Lift your eyes to the sky and feel the sunshine, right? And out of these really sort of desperate circumstances, he somehow seems to muster a little bit of like a mustard seed of consolation for himself. Like if he's not going to get consolation from someone else, he manages to muster it himself, right? And he basically says, I'm like a plant. I'm stuck here and I want to make the most of it. Yeah. Grow where we are. Yeah. And I mean, that is how this Team Peachtree channel came about, where I was telling you there are 2 peaches right outside the window. Right now, there's an apple tree and a peach tree. And the one is just happened to be in a situation where it would get a lot more sun. And the other one was in a situation where it was born in the shade. So it's just the luck of the gamble of life, right? And so what you're going to do, cry about whatever your situation is, and you might have every reason to. You might say, why did you plant me here, not plant me there? I mean, it's so unfair. This one's getting the sunshine all the time. And guess what happened? The other tree actually died. And the one that was in the more challenging circumstances worked harder, tried harder, grew faster, did all of that, and right now is almost, it looks like a fully mature peach tree. I'm expecting to get a lot of peaches this spring. It really is astonishing. But one nevertheless needs to do that, to say, I don't care what your I see the super chats, thank you very much. But one really does need to say, I don't care what's going on with you, and maybe your life is so great and you've done that. I'm I'm here and I need to grow here. I need to make the most of my situation, and there are things that I can make the most of, but can I see them? Am I too blinded by looking at others and looking over my neighbor's wall and whatever? Am I too blinded by envy and agitation, and even if it's rational, even if it's justified, that I can't actually see what I actually have? What do I have? I don't know what it is. It might be your own talents. It might be a situation. It might be many different things. Open, like open your eyes. And so he's saying that in the asylum, he's saying, I'm here. I can nevertheless grow. And he does. And he paints one of the most magnificent artworks, this leaping through the heavens artwork from such a derelict, shipwrecked situation that he's in. And if he can do it, so can we. You know, he really can. Yvonne, thanks so much. Yvonne says, thanks for. Well, I'm just repeating his eloquence. I mean, I'm very inspired by how inspired he is despite these incredible adversities. Maria, thanks so much. Well, it's one of the biggest super chats I think I've ever gotten. I must write down what I was saying when I got it. I'm just one person that you have unknowingly been an inspiration to keep moving forward and to see things in a unique perspective. Never let anyone disrupt you from your goal. Thanks so much. Well, Maria, you have just bought a non-membership next. Let's make it next 5 episodes. So thanks a lot for that, Maria. I don't want to be mercenary, but I mean, to me, it's a schlep to put them in members only. But as a result of that, thanks, Maria. We're going to just keep the format the way we are till Van Gogh Letters 90. Okay. Robin says, I will tell my kids that. You should. Okay. Yeah, I feel the same way. Thanks so much. Okay, so he goes on to say, aren't we forced to submit to growing like a plant without the power to move? By which I mean, in what way our imagination impels us into being reaped when we are ripe, like the same wheat. And so he's thinking about that. He's thinking, am I about to die? Is this the end for me? He's thinking, think about it. The people around him are in different states of kind of decay, either mental decay or physical decay or both. And he actually is as well. He is actually dying. He's got syphilis. He is actually struggling with his mental health, and it's going to get worse. So he's absolutely right to say, am I about to be reaped? Am I ripe to be reaped? Right? So make no mistake, when he leaves the asylum and he walks out into that hot summer sun and he sees this golden wheat rippling in the air, in the wind, he doesn't see wheat. He sees himself ripe to be reaped, and he's thinking about the end of his own life. And so he's not like walking around doing cartwheels. He's walking around with the sense that of the running grave. Is death about to actually catch him? And the answer is actually yes. Whether or not he survives the asylum, he's absolutely right. Intuitively, he's absolutely right. It's not far away. In fact, he has now gone into the month of July. He's talking about these themes. He will die in the month of July 1 year from now. So it is very immediate, everything he's talking about. It's not like, okay, no, well, he got out of the asylum. Yeah. But a year later, he was dead. And so he says, I just want to see what when he says, by which I mean, in what way our imagination impels us. Because that's what's happening to him. His imagination is impelling him despite everything. Anyway, he says, what I want to tell you is that the wisest thing to do is not to long for complete recovery, not too long. And I mean, it's almost like he's writing to himself because his sister's not sick. He says, not too long to get back more strength than I have now. And I shall probably get used to the idea that I shall be broken a little sooner or later. Does it matter after all? Can you see how he's resigning himself to his fate? He's accepting what is about to happen. And that is, in a way, releases this incredible fountain, this incredible fireworks of art, especially when he goes to Orvez. It's almost like, I know it's almost over. It's like an eternal sunshine of the spotless mind. I know it's almost over. I know there's not a lot left. Well, let me enjoy it. Let me keep doing what I know how to do. This is how I live. Let me just live it that way. Let me just paint these paintings. So he's saying, I'm not going to long for a recovery. I'm not going to long for more strength. What I need to do is get used to the idea. And in a way, what that then does is it releases energy, right? He's not fighting against a current. He's kind of, do you see what I'm saying? And he says, well, I might be broken sooner or later, but maybe I'm going to be broken sooner. He says, what does it matter? And although these are fighting words in a way, in a way you can look at this and say, wow, by the way, welcome, Deborah. You can look at this and say, wow, I'm actually, so he really does have this incredible courage. But when he's shot, does he want to die? Like a year later, when he's got a bullet in his abdomen, when he's bleeding, when he is absolutely facing death, is he like, no big deal? No, he wants to live. He says, get this bullet out of me. And then he also says to his brother, oh no, the sadness is going to last forever. And so he is trying to resist depression. He is trying to resist madness. He is trying to resist the entropy of death. He is trying to resist all of the negativity around him. And he does. When he is ultimately shot, he says, basically, oh my God, I guess the sadness is going to last forever. Meaning, I was trying to get out of this, and I did, but I didn't. And in a real sense, what he's trying to get to is a kind of happily ever after. He's trying to have what everybody else has, which is a family, a little house with a trickle of smoke coming out of the chimney, and just kind of an average life where things are, where he has a companion and maybe does some art, but he basically has a nice life. And he wouldn't mind that. But he kind of needs, one thing that he needs is a wife. But he's a really long way now from that. He needs friends. He needs whatever anyone wants, people around him that love him. And he's the furthest from that he's ever been. He's alone in a madhouse in the south of France. He's an artist that no one understands. He couldn't be further adrift on the sea that he's on than he is. It should be terrifying, and I think it eventually is terrifying, because the only certain thing that he's facing is death. The only thing that he can be certain about is that. Anyway, he says, well, you need to get used to the idea. And what does it matter after all? Now, this is the same artist that executed Starry Night. What does it matter after all? What matters a lot, means a lot. What you write about Theo's health is something I know quite well, and this is something that we also tend to underestimate, is that Theo right now is also having health problems. Even though Theo's gotten married, he also has health problems. And Joe is going to say the same thing in a minute, where she says, we're actually worried about having a child because Theo's health is not so good. Just like Vincent's health's not good, Theo's health's not good. And this is the part I don't understand. If you're going to say, and this is the cliche of Van Gogh, if you're going to say, oh, yeah, oh, Van Gogh, he was the mad artist. Oh, Van Gogh, yeah, he was troubled. He couldn't sell his art. He was the mad artist. Then what is Theo's deal? Why does Theo die? Van Gogh dies, but he was a mad artist, and we know how he died. So why does Theo die? And the counter to that is actually they had the same thing, syphilis. And Theo also went mad at the end of his life. Theo also was like hysterical and he was literally acting like a madman. He was raving. No one talks about Theo going mad. So how can you have Vincent being a mad artist and Theo also being a mad artist? Well, only if you have syphilis. And that is the, what's the word that he used? Obstinate callousness. So we're all going to talk about Van Gogh. We're all going to remember Van Gogh. We're all going to think what a great artist he was, but we're still not going to tell the truth about it. We're all going to just remember, well, Van Gogh really means a lot to me, but we're still not going to tell the truth about who he really was. So just like true crime, in our pursuit for justice, we're going to lie and manipulate just as much. We're going to be greedy, just like the perpetrator. In our pursuit of Van Gogh's truth, we're also going to lie about him in ways that suit us. Obstinate callousness. A truly terrible disease. Yeah. The sadness is going to last forever. Yeah. The sadness is going to last forever. Okay, so we're almost at the end of this letter. This is really one of his most incredible letters. I'll put this easily in the top 10 of his most poignant letters. So much is happening in this letter, the separation of core. And then he says, what you write about Theo's health is something I know quite well. I know about it. And he's saying more than I think it is obvious there. He says, nevertheless, I hope that this domestic life will fully restore his health. Well, guess what? It's not. Theo's got 18 months to live. Theo's just gotten married and he's about to have a child. He's got 18 months to live. Vincent's got 1 year. I think his wife, sensible and affectionate enough to take very good care of him and to see to it that he does not eat that restaurant stuff exclusively, but that he once more comes to know the true Dutch cooking. That Dutch cooking is very good, so let her more or less change into a cook and let her assume a reassuring attitude, even if she should be a bit of a tart about it. Sorry, that's just... Obviously, this is not going to help Theo very much. I'm not saying it doesn't help him, but Dutch cooking alone is not going to do it. Theo needs to stop going to brothels. Theo needs basically antibiotics, just like Vincent does. Theo needs to work less and basically just recover his strength. And in this sense, that's the major difference between Theo and Vincent, is Vincent in the asylum does get a bit of a reprieve from what he's going through. He rests. He doesn't go out as much. He drinks less. He does, to some extent, rest and grow like a plant. And to an extent, that is exactly what he did need, is to stay in one place so that he could grow. There's a tremendous lesson in that, and it's kind of a humble lesson, isn't it? Is that if you try and run off after your dreams, you might slip in the first steps that you're taking. I'm not saying don't dream, just that your dreams might be right where you are. Dream where you are, not some other place. start where you are, not some other place. Anyway, he goes on to say, Theo himself is obliged to be a Parisian, but notwithstanding that, he is absolutely in need of being reminded of his youth and his past. I don't know whether that's a reference to the womanizing and the brothel visits. I, who have neither wife nor child, feel the need of seeing the wheat fields, and it would be difficult for me to stay in the city for any length of time. Besides, knowing his character, I fully expect that his marriage will do him an enormous amount of good. Before one can arrive at an opinion about his health, it is more or less necessary to give them time to take root together and attain harmony. I think he's talking about marriage and health. It's interesting, he also used the word take root together. Like if you're married, your roots take root together and attain harmony. And besides, I dare say she would have found the means to make life a bit more pleasant for him than it has been up to now, for he has been through hard times. Well, Van Gogh as well. That is all for now, for I have to finish this letter if I wanted to go off today, and I haven't got time to read it over. So in case I have made many blunders, you will kindly excuse me. Now, I must say, what's incredible about Van Gogh letters is this thing of he would write a letter, post it, and it would pretty much arrive in Paris the very next day. Basically, he'd post it in Arles or in Saint-Remy, and it would arrive literally 1 or 2 days later in Paris. And obviously, it's thanks to the advent of steam trains and so on. I once got a package that I had to go and pick up at the local post office, and the postage stamp showed that it had basically taken about 6 weeks to get to me. And I said, do you know, in like over 130 years ago, people got their letters the same day or like the next day? And the lady just like looked at me. But I was like, yeah, 6 weeks to get this. Now it's anyway. I mean, it's slightly different because you have, I think where the letter came from was Europe, but we also have things called jet planes, which can get things to you the same day as well. Anyway, it says, in case I've made many blunders, you'll kindly excuse me. I think that's a reference just to, if you guys are so upset with me for missing the wedding, if you're upset about the scandal, I have made a couple of mistakes. Sorry about that. Be prosperous and don't worry too much. And look at that. By cultivating your garden and by doing all the other things, be well assured that you're making headway against trouble. A kiss in thought, yours, Vincent. And so he really is kind of a gardener himself. He's someone who thinks about plants, thinks about trees, thinks about the wheat, thinks about this particular painting where they are praying above a basket with, I think, potatoes inside or something. And now we go on to, so it's the 2nd of July. And he still hasn't heard from Theo. So now he writes to Theo and he writes, my dear Theo, enclosed is one of Mother's letters. Of course, you know all the news in it. I think that Cora is very smart to go there. And so there it is. Cora has decided to go to South Africa. And at the time, Transvaal was a independent country. It was one of the states in South Africa. So you had the Cape Province, the Free State, Natal, Royal Natal, Transvaal. These were all independent little countries inside of South Africa. They were like states. And obviously, they later became, after the Boer War, they became South Africa, and they don't exist anymore. But they were states with their own flags, their own coat of arms, own constitutions, own citizens. And so Cora was going to go to Transvaal, and It's 1889, and Cora would have his own Holocaust. Cora would arrive in South Africa as an engineer. He would work. They were basically building railway lines to, basically South Africa was coming on steam. Excuse the pun. In terms of gold had been discovered, and they needed expertise. They needed outside help. They needed qualified engineers, experts, to come from Europe to basically build infrastructure, to build railway lines, to get the gold that they were mining out the ground and back to Europe, to get it, onto trains, which would then go onto boats, which would then go into jewelry stores in Europe, right? And so South Africa was like coming online, and so Europe was being called on to provide, all sorts of uh, qualified experts, and so gives you an idea that the Van Goghs were no slouches. You might say, they're idiots. The one's an art dealer and the other one's an artist, and they don't make any money. And someone just decided that their art is no. Cora was an engineer. They weren't dumb people, and so he goes to South Africa, and unfortunately for him, he has a catastrophe waiting for him as well. There's about to be one of the world's worst wars, one of the world's bloodiest, most brutal wars as well. Infernos, concentration camps, of which he tries to escape. Cora also gets extremely sick. And so Cora is heading to his own Holocaust as well. And Cora actually fights with the South Africans and gets captured or is facing capture by the British. And anyway, it ends very unhappily for him as well. Very long journey. And it's a journey by boat. So he then said, as Maria says, that was yesterday, 135 years ago. That was just yesterday. For me, it's the day before because it's the 4th year. May the 4th be with you. Anyway, so he says it's different from staying in Europe down there. You don't have to put up with the influence of our big cities, which are so old that everything in them seems to be tottering and in its dotage. So it's literally his brother is heading to Africa, not just Africa, the southernmost point in Africa. And so while he's stuck like a plant growing in a pot, his one brother's getting married and having a child and honeymooning, and the other brother is going far afield to South Africa. And there's the World Fair playing out. Things couldn't be more weird for this artist. Lives are continuing while his life is not. And so he says, talks about how old the cities are, so old that everything seems to be tottering and in its dotage. I must say, I found Europe quite depressing. Like at turns beautiful, but like cities in England, London, Bristol, Edinburgh, sometimes beautiful, majestic, but under cloudy skies, there's nothing more depressing than a very old building that's dripping in the rain. It's like being in a graveyard. And whereas the new world is really fresh and vibrant and new and expanding and creating itself, a lot of the old world is stuck. I don't really like Rome very much, but it has its moments. The food is good. The history, if you can bring it alive, is good. But the Colosseum in the rain, I don't think is the most inspiring place. I think it's quite depressing. And of course, there's a Colosseum in awe. Anyway, he talks about instead of seeing his vital strength and native and natural energy evaporate in circumlocution, it's possible that he might be far happier distancing himself from our society. So he's basically saying, without being too specific about it, he's saying him going to South Africa, that might be right for him. That might be the right answer for him. And of course, my great-grandfather did exactly the same thing. In 1920, I think, he left the very civilized country that the Netherlands is, and he came here, and he lived in Cape Town and had a very happy life. Of course, that was post Anglo-Boer War. The Anglo-Boer War lasted almost as long as the Second World War. I mean, it was a bloody precursor to the First World War. Anyway, he says he, meaning Kor, should do this without delay and act with honesty as he has been taught, and not hesitate to accept the situation. However, it's not to acquaint you with all this news that I'm sending you this letter, which you know already. Right, and so he says, but it is to let you know how firm and regular the handwriting is. He's trying to say to his brother, I'm okay, I'm not going mad, right? Look at my handwriting, I'm sensible. Remarkable enough when you think that what she says is really true, that she's a mother of almost 70. Oh, hang on, he's talking about his mother's handwriting. Oh, okay, right. And just as you already wrote me and our sister too, that she seems to have grown younger, I see it myself in this clear handwriting and the very clear logic in what she writes and the simplicity with which she appreciates facts. Well, I really need to wrap this up before 3 hours. My voice is not going to survive. There's just two things I really want to share with you guys before I do. I think there's one more letter I need to get to. Anyway, he says, just as you already wrote me and our sister too, so it's obviously a reference to their mother, that she's still of sound mind. I think now that this growing young again has come to her just because she's glad that you are married. So remember, their mother is a widow. You know, the first person to die in the Van Gogh family was obviously Vincent's older brother, who was stillborn. He was also called Vincent, I think. And then anyway, in terms of now, the first person that has died in this second period is their father, and so she's obviously mourned him and felt his loss, and life has become more limited and grim in a way. And now with Theo getting married, she's suddenly coming alive again. That there's hope again in the world, that there's joy in the world. And so she says, I congratulate you because your marriage enables you and Joe to have a rather rare pleasure of seeing your mother grow young again. And this is something he can't see. This is yet another thing that is a contrast to Van Gogh. While he's dying, his mother's coming back to life. While one brother's having a child and getting married, you're going to hear about the child, and honeymooning and whatever, and the other brother's going to seek his fortune in South Africa. All of this is happening, and he's dying. He's lost his ear. He's dying. Can you see how absolutely horrible it must have been? Everyone is living happily ever after except him. He says, it is really for that reason that I'm sending you the letter. For my dear boy, one sometimes needs a reminder later on, and it happens so fortunately that just at the moment when she will have the great sorrow of parting with Kor. Again, what a generous spirit that he can say, given the situation he's in, he can still look into his family and say, it's so great that mom doesn't have to, that whole empty nest thing, that mom doesn't have to mourn Kor's departure because she can celebrate what's happening with you and Joe. She can live herself into your situation and not be caught up in the sadness of losing another son. And then he says, it'll be hard on her and she'll be comforted by knowing you're married. But think about what a generous spirit he is, that even though he's in the asylum, that he can think about his mother in such a kind-hearted way, in the same way that he thinks about other artists and what's good in their work in such a kind-hearted way. In other words, he's not a jerk. He's actually a very sweet soul. Well, he can be. He says, if possible, you must not wait a whole year before going back to Holland, for she will be longing to see you again, you and your wife. Now, you can imagine that he probably wouldn't mind going to Holland himself. It would certainly be better than the asylum. And so he's really being considerate. He's thinking about happiness and welfare in some detail of his family members. Can I share? Can I share a little gripe with you guys? Just a little gripe. It was my dad's birthday recently, and I said to my dad, "Well, we really should barbecue." Part of it was selfish because I haven't, like, the South African braai really is awesome, and I haven't had one for a long time. So I was like, "Dad, let's braai," and he hasn't braaied a long time as well, just for whatever reason. And so he said, "Okay, well, if you want to braai, you braai. You get the meat, and I'll get the fire going, but." You want to braai, you braai. So I said, okay, I'll braai. I'll barbecue. So today was the day to do it. And so I kind of had to force myself to wake up early. I was really tired. And anyway, long story short, I'm barbecuing outside in the cold. I mean, it was my idea. While my entire family are inside, basically eating what I've made while I'm still outside barbecuing. And it was like, I don't know, it was pretty funny. Um, and what I did, I mean, I was wanting to join them as well, but there was I was able to move my sense of this is not really right or fair to I'm glad to see them enjoying themselves, because it was really cold outside, and yeah, that's what he's doing right here. Is basically just having a bit of a heart for somebody else, and even if it is at your expense, you can still have a heart for somebody else, right? And so he says, at the same time, since you've married a Dutch woman, within a few years' time, sooner or later, it may revive the business relations with Amsterdam or The Hague. Well, once more, I've not seen a letter of mother showing so much inner serenity and calm contentment. That's all these themes are happening with so much drama and heartache and pain and suffering that he's going through. He's thinking about serenity and contentment and consolation. I haven't seen this for many years. And so his mother is consoled in this situation. Of course, he isn't. He says, I'm sure this comes from your marriage. They say that pleasing your parents assures long life. Interesting. How does that saying go in the Bible? Honor your mother and father that your days may be longer, right? Then he says, thank you very much for the package of colors. So he has sent Vincent some art. He says, subtract them from the order sent since. But if you can manage it, not for the quantity of white. So he does want a lot more white. Then he talks about Shakespeare. Thanks also very heartily for the Shakespeare. It will help me not to forget the little English I know. But above all, it is so fine. I've begun to read. So can you imagine that this guy is a Dutch guy living in France, reading Shakespeare in English, the original Shakespeare. He's not reading Shakespeare for dummies or he's reading raw Shakespeare, and he's a Dutchman living in France. Talk about a sophisticated intellect, right? Then that's exactly it. He's seeing life pass him by. Anyway, he goes on to say, I've already read Richard II, Richard IV, and half of Richard V. I must say, to me, the best one is Richard III. Anyone here read Richard III? Great Shakespearean play. Then he says, I read those without wondering if the ideas of the people of those times were different from our own. So, in other words, he's thinking, well, things were the same then. And I must say, it does seem that way. When you read Shakespeare, it seems like people are people. People are people. People don't really change. The types of people that exist in society don't really change. And then he says, or what would become of them if you confronted them with Republican and socialist beliefs and so on? Actually seems like he's been watching the news, right? Then he says, what touches me, as in some novelists of our days, that the voices of these people, which in Shakespeare's case reach us from such a distance of several centuries, do not seem unfamiliar to us. And in a very weird way, yeah, Van Gogh is poking fun at us because we are reading his words a century later, almost a century and a half later, and they seem totally undiluted by time. It seems like, um, he didn't write this a year ago today, but yesterday. It feels modern. It feels contemporary. It is so much alive that you think you know them and see the thing, and so does he. And so what Rembrandt has done, and another reference to him, and so what Rembrandt has alone or almost alone among painters, that tenderness of gaze that we see, whether it's in the Men of Emmaus or the Jewish Bride, or in some other strange angelic figures, the picture you have. In other words, remember, he's not a um, religious Protestant that he once was. He is nevertheless seeing where Rembrandt was painting the like religious themes, he nevertheless recognizes the extraordinary humanity, um, not necessarily the divine aspect, but something that is approximate to divine in these paintings. Is touching on, best I can describe it as kind of a global um, human experience that is like a religious feeling, if I can put it that way. And Van Gogh himself is trying to paint in the same way. He's trying to evoke almost a painting that is a prayer or a painting that is a hymn, right? And so he says, um, that glimpse of superhuman infinitude that seems so natural there. In many places, you come upon it in Shakespeare too. And so, what's so incredible here is you have this great artist recognizing greatness in other writers and other artists, and recognizing that that same greatness is in both of them. Is recognizing what that spirit is in an artist that really matters, right? And look at how he describes it: superhuman infinitude. And think about Starry Night. Isn't that touching on this thing that is beyond human, the infinitude of the universe, right? That's what he's trying to touch on. Turning a tree that is a finite thing that can burn down, that can be struck by lightning, turning a tree into a symbol of heaven, of death, of eternity. And so he says you see it in many places, and then above all, he's full of portraits, grave or gay, like Six and the Traveller, and like Saskia. This is a guy who knows his art so well. He's not in a museum; he's in a madhouse, and he's able to summon these images in his mind, almost like he's got a photographic memory. What a good excuse me, what a good idea of Victor Hugo's son to translate all this into French so that it will be within everyone's reach. So actually, I don't know whether he was reading it in English. Didn't he say somewhere that he was reading it in English? But anyway, maybe he wasn't. When I think of the Impressionists and of all the problems of art nowadays, I just want to quickly make sure, did Vincent van Gogh read Shakespeare? Okay, we know he did, but did he read it in English? Oh, well, they say he was fluent in English and French, both in writing and reading. Let's have a look. This is just what Google says. Did he read Shakespeare? Look at that. Shakespeare's language and his way of doing things are purely the equal of any brush trembling with fever and emotion. So yeah, he's actually even comparing Shakespeare to his own art. It's quite amazing. So obviously he was inspired by Shakespeare. In terms of his painting, he was inspired by Shakespeare. Right. Okay, so what does he say here? When I think of the Impressionists, what do some of you guys say? He said it earlier in the letter. Yeah, I think he did say that. I think he did say that, and absolutely, what an intellect! You know, you might, and I think this is the problem with Van Gogh. You look at someone and he smells, and he has tattered clothing, and when you talk to him, he just starts talking, and he won't stop talking, you know, because he's a lonely person. You don't really realize you're dealing with an incredibly clever person, but for the average person, they go, "You weird, you arrogant, fuck off." That's basically their response to him. You weird, which is code for I don't really understand you. Like I just don't understand what you're saying. So I guess I'm smarter than what you are. You smell, so it's like you are different to me in that you don't look like a genius. So fuck off. And then, well, because I don't really understand what's going on, fuck off. So there it is in a nutshell. The callousness, right? The obstinate callousness. Yeah, as Robbie Robbins says, he was a genius. Um, and so he says, when I think of the Impressionists and all the problems of art nowadays, what lessons there are in that very thing. And so the idea came to me from what I've just been reading that the Impressionists are right 1,000 times over, yet even then, they must think over long and well whether it follows from this that they have the right or the duty to take justice into their own hands. Quite interesting words given what we do on the other channel. If they dare call themselves primitive, certainly they could do well to learn a little to be primitives as men before pronouncing the word primitive as a title, which would give them a right to anything, whatever. Now, bear in mind at this time, the world was kind of not translating, but is not escalating. The world was going to the next level, essentially from a primitive state that had been in for a really long time. I mean, pre-industrial. I mean, pre-engines and machines. Um, a lot of the world was farms in this time, farms and farmlands. If you wanted to be wealthy, well, you were a farmer, and the more farmland you had, the better, and the bigger the crop, the better. At this time, although it had been underway for some time, the world is transforming into the industrial world, and they would then sneer at the world as primitive. And so, if you went, for example, from the first world to the new world, so if you went from Europe to America, or you went from Europe to Malacca, or you went from Europe to Australia, or you went from Europe to South Africa, you would tend to think of Europe as the better place, this place of wealth and power and education and civilization, and all these other places as primitive. And you would imagine that they would sneer at these places. And of course, eventually over time, these primitive places would become much greater than Europe. I'm not saying that they would surpass them in all aspects. Arguably, they still haven't in art, but certainly would surpass them in terms of empire and in terms of other things, technology and so on. Think about American technology. Think about South Africa and the incredible. South Africa at one point was by far the richest gold producer in the world. Um, producing so much of that, but would come down to Europe to refine the gold into jewelry. But I'm just saying it was a big deal in this time, this whole idea of primitives. He says we would do well to learn a little to be primitives as men before pronouncing the word primitive as a title, which would give them a right to anything, whatever. You kind of get the sense that at the time there were conversations that were kind of racist, kind of discriminatory between one group of people and another. Anyway, he says, but as for those who may be the cause of impressionist unhappiness, well, they are in a pretty serious predicament, even though they make light of it. So beyond Van Gogh, the art crowd were in a process of transformation. Impressionism was giving way to something, but they didn't quite know what. Impressionism was kind of over. Impressionism was a phase, and that phase was coming to an end. And so, in the same way that Van Gogh is experiencing a kind of upheaval in his own life and mind and heart and circumstances, so was the whole art world. The whole art world was ready for something new. The whole art world was um, bickering and struggling and misunderstood in general. And of course, within the background of photography, making its great entrance onto the world stage, another advent of technological progress. Is it true that the French were not big on hygiene? I don't know. I mean, they called syphilis the French disease, and it was a disease that came about amongst a lot of the soldiers. I'm not sure if that's fair to say. You should ask a French person that. Anyway, so he goes on to say, and then it looks as though fighting a battle 7 times a week really could not go on. It is amazing how La Besse de Joueur, when you think of it, holds its own even besides Shakespeare. I'd like to go into that. I just don't have time. If you guys want to Google that and read a bit about what that's about, you can. I think that Renan treated himself to that so as to be able to, for once, to use beautiful words plentifully and pleasurably, for the words are beautiful there. So, I can say it over and over again. Van Gogh is not just an artist. He's a reader. He's a writer. He's a real bookworm. That's another thing you could say. Is there another artist that worked as a art seller, whose brother's an art dealer, who read Shakespeare and all of these other books as well? A really, really well-read artist. I think they are quite rare. Maybe you have artists that are fairly well-read, but as well-read as this one. Reading things in other languages. How many artists do you know that read like high-level literature in another language? So we are dealing with a very special individual here. Then he says, in order that you have some idea of what I'm doing, I'm sending you a dozen drawings today, all from canvases I'm working on. So what is he doing? He's reading, he's writing, he's painting, he's walking out into the countryside, and he's painting that sort of thing. That is a different one, and I really think that is a very, once again, an incredibly ugly execution from web exhibit. So let's get a better version. It reveals Vincent's fascination with the labors of the field, but it also does represent mortality. Okay, this is not terribly better. I must say, I really don't like the sky. I don't like this lime sky. Do you? I think this is the best one that I can find. And I must say, when you see it in the right color, then the sky is not so bad. Look how absolutely awful the sky is. But when you see the proper execution, it actually works. I like this picture. I just don't like the Reaper. The Reaper just looks really clumsy. I don't like that aspect. It's this aspect to Van Gogh that I don't enjoy about him. It's like, cheapest dude, try a bit harder. But just look at how roiling all of this is. Look at the emotion. The emotions and all the sentiments in his letters are in all of these brush strokes. He's not just painting wheat, he's painting a view of himself and of his situation and of us, of people. And yeah, once again is what I refer to as Boompie, Bergie, Heisi. There's the Boompie, there's the Bergie, and there's the Heisi. That's a kind of art that I'm typically not particularly interested in. My grandfather painted it. To me, it's anyway. It does have its charm, but anyway. Okay, so he says the canvas is all yellow except for the wall and the background of violet tinted hills. The canvas, which is almost the same in subject, is different in coloring, being grayish green with a white and blue sky. White and blue sky? How often I think of Reed when I'm reading Shakespeare, and how often I have thought of him while I was worse than I am now. Well, so he's actually been worse. He's been in a worse place than he is now. When he says that I was worse than I am now, what do you think he's talking about? When he says I was worse than I am now, what do you think he's referring to? Oh yeah, he ran out of white. That's true. He was talking about the aftermath to the ear incident. So immediately after he lost his ear, he was a lot worse. He was near death, and he was also a little bit out of his mind. How much was absent, and how much was syphilis, and how much was drunkenness, and how much was being emotionally hysterical, and how much was him being in love or whatever. I don't know. But no, I'm just saying I was worse than I am now. Well, you need to go back to December 24th or so. That's when he was worse. And so if you think about it, he's actually regained his mental health since then. It's easy to imagine the opposite, that he's losing it. It actually he's regained it, but of course he's going to lose it again, right? Good point. Okay. So then he says, thinking that I was far too hard on him and too discouraging when I claimed that it was better to care for the painters than for the pictures. I wonder whether he didn't feel the same way about Gauguin. I was far too hard on him and too discouraging. He says, it is not within my power to make distinctions like this, even faced with a problem which we see our living friends suffering under, the lack of enough money to live on and to pay for their paints, and on the other hand, the high prices paid for the canvases of dead painters. And I mean, isn't that exactly what he's being faced with? Well, I must say, I can feel how cold it is outside. I know very cold weather is headed this way, but it seems like it's already here. I can feel the cold through my. Anyone want to guess how cold it is right now? It's 39 degrees Fahrenheit. Tomorrow, the minimum is going to be 26. That's how cold it's going to be. 26, which is below zero. Oh, and then Monday will be 24. So we're going to get some pretty cold weather here. I'll have to sit here like in a jacket if I'm going to sit here. Okay, so he says, I'm just saying I can feel the cold right now. It's pretty much the coldest time of the morning. I was reading in a newspaper a letter from a collector of Greek things to one of his friends, in which the phrase occurred, "You who love nature, I who love everything the hand of man has made. This difference in our taste is basically a unity." And I thought that this was better than my argument. And he talks about these. Okay, that's not there. I have a canvas of cypresses with some ears of wheat, some poppies, a blue sky like a piece of multicolored Scotch plaid. Now, you guys do know that Van Gogh kept balls of wool in a box to measure and to test and to get a sense of how colors contrast. Well, Scotch plaid is the epitome of that kind of thing, and so he compares this tapestry of poppies and blue sky and cypresses to Scotch plaid. I don't know if you guys know my lounge curtains are blue Scotch plaid. My bedroom curtains are green Scotch plaid, and my bathroom curtains are red Scotch plaid. Did any of you guys know that? Anyway, then he says, the former painted with thick impasto like the Monticellis, and the wheat field with the sun, which represents the extreme heat, very thick too. I think that these would make it more or less clear to him that he could not lose much by remaining friends with us. But that is true for us as well. So even in his painting, he's thinking that he's communing with another artist, even though it's a dead artist. Even though that is, communicating on almost a cellular level, a spiritual level with other great artistic greats. He really is an incredibly cerebral person. I just want to make sure when Monticelli died. 1886. So yeah, he'd been deceased for just 3 years. So Monticelli had only recently died. That's him, by the way. French Impressionist. That's some of his work. A painter at work on a house wall, 1875. Portrait de Madame Pascal. I think, do you guys agree that I think that portrait is better than Van Gogh's best portrait? It's just my opinion. Look at that. Wow. Ladies in a Garden, 1870. That is pretty impressionistic, that's for sure. I wonder what these things are, these swords. Wonder what that is. Look at that lady, and there's another lady. I must say, I went through a phase where I wanted to paint in this way, not quite as, not with oil paints, but with bright shapes, brightly colored shapes, where you don't want to show exactly what you representing. You want someone's mind to fill in that space, and there you can see a woman's face, and a woman's face, and a woman's face, and a woman's face. But this is kind of what he's referring to. Not bad. Not quite my cup of tea. Very, I don't know, looks like bison. Anyway, it's not my cup of tea either. Yuck, those colors. That's a bit better. That's quite interesting. You can see it's very, very impressionistic. It's almost like you're seeing something through a fog or a mist or smoke. Look at that boat over there. And kind of what this is doing is it's recognizing the ability of the viewer, of the audience, to see what they want to see, and you provide a guideline. The art is providing guidance, but you actually fill in the blanks in a way. And it's a different kind of art. Definitely is a different kind of art. If you look at this style and you compare it to Van Gogh's style, it's similar, but it's definitely not the same. He's interpreted this style in a totally different way, hasn't he? Okay, let's have a look at another one. Not terribly awesome, but there we have it. So yeah, he's referring to Monticelli, and obviously feels like a bit of a kindred spirit with Monticelli. And then he says it was perhaps right to disapprove of his method. We must, on our side, take a step forward toward reconciliation. So what he's saying is Monticelli's work is good, but we need to take it further, and that's exactly what he does. That is also a very bold thing. Someone would say, wow, you're arrogant. You haven't sold a single picture, and you think you can take a whole art movement forward. Well, that is exactly what he does do. Anyway, he says, I dare not write now for fear of saying too many silly things, but when I'm more certain of my pen, I, I should very much like to write to him someday. I don't know whether he doesn't know that he's no longer alive, or he's perhaps forgotten. I still have some canvases in all which were not dry when I left. I very much want to go and get them one of these days in order to send them to you. There are half a dozen. That's actually not a good sign, what's going on here, because him going back to all is just not going to be very good. What do you think he's going to do when he goes back to all? What do you think he's missing in the asylum? The drawing seemed to me to have little color this time, and the too smooth paper must have caused it. The weeping tree and the courtyard of the hospital at all have more color, but at the same time, all the same, this will give you an idea of what I'm doing. The canvas of the reaper is going to be something like the sower of last year. Now, sometimes Van Gogh has a high opinion of his work, and I don't think this is terribly good. Like, you can talk about that all day, and I'm never gonna say I think that is very good. I don't like it. I like the idea of it, but I don't like the painting. If you said, would you please hang this in your house? I would say, even if you paid me, I wouldn't. No thanks. How fine Zola's books will continue to be because there is life in them. It's interesting that he's remained a fan of Zola all along. He never outgrew Zola. Emile Zola. He never kind of got to the point where he said, I, like where he felt contempt towards him. Are there some artists and authors that you liked once upon a time, but today you can't actually believe you did? I must say there are definitely a handful of authors that I feel that way about, including one or two that I've actually met, where you realize, wow, I don't know what I was thinking. Anyway, he says, what has life in it too is that mother is glad that you are married, and I think that this cannot be unpleasant to yourselves, you and Joe. Now, do you guys remember what? I really wish I could hear your voices when I ask this question. Do you guys remember what the original reason was that Vincent van Gogh supposedly cut off his ear? Let me type it in here. Do you remember what the original reason was for I'm sitting funny, that's why I'm not typing so well. Aha, we have a winner. We have a winner. Well done, Robbie, because Theo was getting married. Now we are 6-7 months later, and he's been saying how great it is. He hasn't been complaining about it, right? Because Theo was getting married, I'm saying what maybe some experts did say tinnitus, but one of the big theories why Van Gogh cut off his ear when he cut off his ear is that he found out that Theo was getting married. Like, if that was such a big deal, genuinely a big deal, he wouldn't really want to talk about it. If it was like really like shit, it's either her or me. It's either Joe or me. He wouldn't want to write to Joe. He wouldn't want to hear about Joe. He wouldn't want to think about Joe. And right. And there you have it. And it just shows you just how effing stupid these art critics are. They don't know what they're talking about. They have an idea and they think, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, it makes sense to you. It doesn't make sense to what really happened. Yeah, I say so as well. But you should also say to me, good memory. Anyway, I suppose that's non-negotiable. I should have a good memory on this. So, well, the idea was, Chelsea, that his brother was getting married, and so his brother, who was his best friend and his supporter, wasn't going to support him anymore. And I think that showed, like, an art expert saying that doesn't know Theo, doesn't know Theo's relationship with Vincent, doesn't know what actually happened, and doesn't know what Vincent actually thought about it either. In those three dimensions, they don't know what they're talking about. Yeah, no, that's what I think. Okay, so anyway, he says again, so he's saying, I'm so glad you are married. Mother's glad. It's really good for you. And of course, there was some truth to that. There was a little bit of truth. There was a bit of concern. And he said so, but they dealt with it. And his brother said, don't worry. I'm actually doing well this year. So, it's obviously a case that these experts just didn't do enough reading or thinking or spent enough time on this. But the separation from Cor will be harder on her than one can imagine. Now, it's quite interesting that he is separated from his own mother, and you can kind of tell that that's not a big deal to his mother. Him being in the asylum and having cut off his ear, you don't kind of get the feeling that his mother's losing too much sleep over it. You do get the feeling that Cor may have been a bit of a mama's boy, and Cor was sort of in the house. Their father had died, and so now there are not too many people around her anymore. And so he says that's going to be quite hard for her. And then he says, it is just in learning to suffer without complaint, in learning to look on pain without repugnance, that you risk vertigo. And yet it is possible. Now I'm about to make, I think, a really important point. If you want to understand Van Gogh, and I believe I do, and I believe I have, and I believe my book demonstrates that. But if you want to understand Van Gogh, you need to look at the books that mean the most to him, and the ethos and the themes in those books that mean a lot to him. And one of the books that has always meant the most to him, and the spirit that has meant the most to him, has come from Emile Zola. And this idea of a white donkey going into the mines of the Borinage and doing whatever it was doing with the miners, and coming back out and doing that day after day, and some of these donkeys never coming out. But basically the spirit of the pilgrim who suffers without complaint, the peasant in the field, like you saw in this. Thanks, Deborah. I just wanted a bit of right. When you see this picture, it's a little bit of suffering without complaint, and this is what he really admires. He admires not only the suffering, the struggle, the difficulty, the adversity, but he also admires doing that without complaint. And so you take that into the ear incident, and you take that into where he has a bullet in his abdomen. Does he suffer and say, Gauguin did it, go and get him, I want payback? To suffer without complaint. When he has the bullet in his abdomen, does he say, Dr. Gachet did it, and he has the gun and put him on trial? Or does he suffer without complaint? I think it's a fantastic point. And we get it from his own words. We get from his own words that this is the kind of person he is, not the kind of person you think he is, not the kind of mad artist that I think the world thinks he is, the kind of person he is, and the kind of person he wants to be, and the kind of person he aspires to be. And here you see it in this picture. Think about Starry Night as well. The little village that is modest and humble beneath a spectacular sky. That little village suffers without complaint while the universe does what it does. He says, in learning to look on pain without repugnance, and yet it is possible, and yet you may even catch a glimpse of a vague likelihood that on the other side of life we shall see good reason for the existence of pain, which seen from here sometimes so fills the whole horizon that it takes on the proportions of a hopeless deluge. Here he is talking about being on the other side of his own pain and suffering. He really is talking like a prophet, like some kind of prophet. We know very little about this, about his proportions, and it is better to look at a wheat field, even in the form of a picture. He's saying we know very little about the proportions of pain that we're going to endure in our lives, right? And then he says, I shake hands with you both, and I hope to hear from you soon. Good health to both of you. Ever yours, Vincent. This is also quite a powerful, important letter. And then he writes to his mother, and we're going to skip this letter for now because I need to wrap up. It's already 3:21. Wow. But look how long it's been since Theo has written to Vincent. Theo's last letter was this one, 16 June. And so a week goes by, another week goes by, 2 weeks have gone by. He writes to his sister, he writes to his mother, he writes another letter to Theo. He still doesn't hear from Theo. And then at last, on the 5th of July, gets a letter from Theo. 3 weeks have gone by. He paints Starry Night, and following Starry Night, 3 weeks go by. It's one of the longest periods ever where he doesn't hear from Theo. After painting Starry Night, he doesn't get any letters really from Theo. I actually don't know if that's true. We've got this letter. I don't know whether we just simply don't have the letter, because here he says, when you say your mother, I think that's a reference to a letter that he got. But the point is, quite a lot of time did go by between his letters. That's the point I'm trying to make. And this is where Theo actually says so. Just trying to see. Yeah, okay. We're jumping a bit ahead into time. Okay, so yes, the 16th of July. So we've skipped a bunch of letters, and I will come back to them, but I want to just deal with this letter from Theo to Vincent, where he says, so the previous one he says, I couldn't write to you. Okay, so he says, the reason I'm writing you a second time today is I'm enclosing a few words for our friend Gauguin. So yeah, Vincent is writing to Gauguin, but Gauguin doesn't write back to him. We'll deal with that in episode 86. I want to deal with this letter, which is where they tell him about the baby. Okay, that'll be the last letter. So he says, 16 July 1889. This is about a month after Starry Night. My dear Vincent, I've been absolutely unable to write to you sooner, for the heat has been overwhelming and I've felt so weak. So he's also struggling with his health. Everything made me feel extremely tired. Now I'm almost recovered from it for good, I hope. I thank you for your letters and fine drawings you sent me. The hospital at Arles is very remarkable. The butterfly was actually the death's head moth. And the branch of the eglantine are very beautiful too. Is this the letter where he talks about it? No, it's actually not this letter. Sorry, we've got to jump out of this letter. We'll come back to this. So it's the 29th of July. He says, I'm a little uneasy that you've not received my letter. Right? So Theo's just kind of stopped writing to Vincent. Then when you go into August, I'm just trying to see where the... So this is where Court travels to Southampton. Sorry, I'm a little bit lost here. I thought the pregnancy was announced in July. Did I miss something? Was it that letter? Is it this letter? If only the child is viable. You can well imagine that the news of Joe's pregnancy excited her parents greatly. I think it's here. I must have missed something somewhere. Letter from Theo. Here it is. Okay, sorry, it's this letter. So this is the letter where they say, sorry about that, where they say, we pregnant, right? 5th of July, 1889. My dear brother, this time I shall try to write you in French. In the first place, I know you like it better, and then if two people express themselves in the same language, they will understand each other better in the end, I think. Only as for me, I'm not in the habit of writing in French, and I'm afraid I'm only going to make mistakes, which will seem very ridiculous to you, but I shall do the best I can. After some time, I hope to be able to express myself, but at the moment, if the strangers I meet do not speak English, the conversation is far from animated, I assure you. So even his brother is really impressed with his language acquisition. So here he goes. I'm now going to tell you a great piece of news on which we have concentrated a good deal of our attention lately. It is that next winter, towards February probably, we hope to have a baby, a pretty little boy, whom we are going to call Vincent, if you will consent to be his godfather. Of course, I know we must not count on it too much and that it may well be a little girl, but so obviously they are pregnant. But Theo and I cannot help imagining that the baby, so these are Joe's words. Joe's writing this. Theo and I cannot help imagining that the baby will be a boy. When I told them at Amsterdam and Bradel, they all replied, aren't you pleased? What happiness, etc., etc. And yet, to tell the honest truth, I was not pleased at all when I found out about it, to the contrary. So Joe is saying, crap, I'm not very happy to be pregnant. Why? I was very unhappy, and Theo had a lot of trouble consoling me. There's that word again. It's not that I don't like babies. Take my little brother, who's now 12 years old. I held him in my arms when he was hardly 2 hours old, and I think that there's nothing prettier in the world than a baby, but this is something of a selfish pleasure. When I think of how neither Theo nor I are in very good health, so both of them are not doing well. Somebody actually said once, if Theo had syphilis, didn't Joe as well? It's hard to believe that she didn't. So she's saying that neither of them are in good health. And she says, I'm greatly afraid that we are going to have a weak child. You can imagine that that does make sense. And to my way of thinking, the greatest treasure that parents can give to their child is a strong constitution. So true. But in this respect, the doctor has reassured me a good deal. And then taking a good food and taking good care of oneself may do a lot. The baby will have nothing to complain of in this respect. Now, Joe is still writing. Joe writes, do you remember the portrait of the Rouland baby you sent to Theo? Everybody admires it greatly, and people have already asked me many times, why have you put this portrait into such an out-of-the-way corner? It's this one. Ah, let's see if we can find it. I just don't have time to find it. Everybody admires it. The reason is that from my place at the table, I can see the big blue eyes and the pretty little hands and the round cheeks of the baby. And I like to imagine that ours will be equally strong and equally healthy and equally beautiful, and that his uncle will come one day to paint his portrait, exclamation mark. Now, what a wonderful endorsement of Vincent, where a picture that is in Theo's house means so much to Joe at this really important time, right? You can imagine that Vincent is really has got to feel really flattered by this news, or well, certainly by this description of the painting, right? This painting that is inspiring Joe at this important time. And there's an article about it, Madame Roulon and her baby. This is what Vincent painted. One of Van Gogh's many evocative renderings of the Roulin family, undertaken some 6 months after the artist relocated from Paris to Arles. Okay, anyone want to read a bit more about that? Well, there you go. Yeah, it's just gone past 6 a.m. Okay, so let's just get through this letter. We're almost there. Everybody admires it. The baby is got round cheeks, pretty little hands, and I like to imagine that ours will be equally strong. See the round cheeks and the hands. I mean, that is our babies, or sometimes when you hold them. So she says, in one of your last letters, you asked Theo whether he was still dining at restaurants. Oh dear, no, never. What would be good? What would be the good of being married if one could not dine at home? Well, good lady. He always comes home at 12 o'clock to lunch and at 7:30 for dinner. There we've got a nice little sense of the everyday arrangements. Come home at 12, come home again at 7:30. Often in the evening, somebody drops in. Isaacson or Hart Nibrich, the artist. Tierstig dined with us twice, and De Haan has come to see us too. And so these people obviously see Van Gogh's art when they're there. Monsieur Pissarro and his son came too. In general, we are very tired at night and we go to bed early, but notwithstanding this, I think Theo is looking far from well. Quite an ominous thing for the middle of the summer. But that Sacratin sail caused him a lot of fatigue, and besides, the heat is so overwhelming. Don't talk to me of Paris in such weather as this, and Theo says that in August it is even worse. I read with great pleasure what you wrote to Theo about reading Shakespeare. Isn't it beautiful? Now, Joe is also a bookworm, and it's because Joe is a bookworm that she did something with Van Gogh's letters. She may not have known what to do with his art, but she did know what to do with his letters. And she really appreciates the whole Shakespeare side. So isn't it, you wouldn't think of it, right? You wouldn't think that Vincent van Gogh reading Shakespeare would lead Theo's wife to really feel like she had a lot in common with him, right? Yeah, so I mean, she obviously is reading his letters. Anyway, she says, so I actually get the feeling Theo was almost too sick to write this letter, because he actually says that here. Look at this. Letter from Theo, my dear brother. And he says, I'm going to write to you in French. but basically this whole letter is pretty much from Joe. This should actually be from Joe Van Gogh to Vincent, right? Anyway, so she says, "Isn't it beautiful? And so few people know him. It is too difficult," they say, "but it is not true. I, for my part, understand him much better than Zola. But when I think that such beautiful things were written nearly 300 years ago, I think the world has not made much progress since then." Can you see that even Joe is quite a great mind, right? Joe is quite a great mind herself. I once saw The Merchant of Venice at the theatre when I was in London, and the impression it made on me was a great deal stronger still then when I only read it. Oh, so I think she's saying reading it was better. Is that how you guys see it? Is that what you think that's what she means? That reading Shakespeare meant more to her than watching it in London? Or am I not understanding her correctly? Yeah, no, that is what she meant. Then he says, "I've also seen Hamlet and Macbeth, but that was in Dutch, and then it loses much of its beauty." So she also knows Shakespeare in English. That shows quite an educated lady, right? Theo's wife is quite an educated lady. She says, "Now I'm going to say goodbye. Please write to us your opinion about our little boy. For a boy, it must be," and it was a boy. So I'm not going to take it further than that. I think you'll agree this was quite a interesting episode, and it ends on a cliffhanger in the sense that, wow, they're pregnant. What's going to happen now? So I want to end off just with two things. I want you guys to uh, listen to. I want to read a couple of lyrics to you guys, if I can find them. I don't know where they are. Did I close that? It's not that one. I seem to have closed that, so I'm going to have to get it again. Okay, so I want to read some lyrics to you, and then I'm going to. There they are. Okay. Okay. I really want you guys to listen to off when I finish this live. I want you guys to go to this link and listen to this song. If you're listening to it properly, you might listen to it about 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times back to back after what I'm about to say to you. So here's a link to the song. You can also just Google the stable song and YouTube, right? Thanks, Stephanie. Thanks for being here. And so I'm going to read. I'm going to read this the lyrics of the stable song, and what I want you to do is close your eyes while I read it. Yeah, thanks for all the super chats. Close your eyes while I read it to you. Ready? Remember when our songs were just like prayers, like gospel hymns that you caught in the air. Come down, sweet reverence, unto my simple house and ring and ring. Ring like silver, ring like gold, ring out those ghosts on the Ohio, ring like clear day wedding bells. Were we the belly of the beast or the sword that fell? We'll never tell. And come to me clear and cold on some sea. Watch the world spin in waves, mad machine. Now I've gone crazy, couldn't you tell? You threw stones at the stars, but the whole sky fell. Now I'm covered up in straw, belly up on the table. while I drank and sang and passed in the stable. Hmm, 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 hmm. And that tall grass grows high and brown. Well, I dragged you straight in the muddy ground, and you sent me back to where I roam. Well, I cursed and I cried, but now I know, oh, now I know. And I ran back to that hollow again. The moon was just a sliver back then, and I ached for my heart like some tin man. When it came, oh, it beat and it boiled and it rang. Oh, it's ringing. Ring like crazy, ring like hell. Turn me, turn me back into that wild-haired gale. Ring like silver, ring like gold. Turn these diamonds straight back into coal. Turn these diamonds straight back into coal. Hmm. Now, obviously, I want you to, if you can, go to Patreon, watch the music video while reading the words, or listen to the video while reading the words. But let me ask you now, what do these words bring to mind when your eyes are closed and you're hearing the words and getting a sense of the feeling? What does it bring to mind? Remember when our songs were just like prayers, like gospel hymns that caught in the air? Come down, sweet reverence, unto my simple house and ring. Ring like silver, ring like gold. What comes to mind? I'll give you guys a moment. Jody says, fortune's lost. Maria Sierra says, hope. Or how about this? Isn't he channeling Starry Night without knowing it? Or maybe knowing it? What do you guys say? Anyway, I'll leave it at that. Give the song a listen. Give the lyrics a look, and think about. Is there anyone here that said consolation? Think about when you listen to this song, when you read the lyrics. Think about consolation. Does it console you? Is it about consolation? Right? And there's a beautiful banjo that just really touches the heart whenever you hear that song. Just really, really beautiful. And then the last thing I want to share with you is this is Theo's response when he saw Starry Night, right? This is his response when he saw Starry Night. And it's from this article. I'll put a link to this article in chat. But for a moment, just clear your mind. When Theo saw Starry Night, what do you think he thought? Do you think he realized, wow, he painted this 6 months ago, all this time, Vincent's done something incredible, and we didn't even know it? How do you think Theo responded to Starry Night when he saw it? And bear in mind that at that time, Van Gogh was still alive. It was December 1889, and Vincent van Gogh basically had about 6 months left to live. And so in the last 6 months of his life, he is going to be aware of what his brother thought of Starry Night. What do you think his brother thought of Starry Night? Do you think his brother was impressed by it? Do you think his brother recognized his brother's talent, the merit in his art? Do you think his brother validated him? Even his own brother didn't. And so he said the following, and this isn't just Theo, this is the manager of a Parisian art gallery. This is a gifted connoisseur of contemporary art, not just a connoisseur, gifted connoisseur. Well, he was unimpressed. He wasn't impressed by Starry Night, and that's not this one, right? This is this Starry Night. He said, I clearly sense what preoccupies you in the new canvases, like the village in the moonlight, not this one, the village, the Starry Night. But I feel that the search for style takes away the real sentiment of things. And so Theo felt that the painting, Starry Night, pushed style too far at the expense of true emotion. In other words, Theo didn't really think it was very good. And that work went on to become iconic of individualized expression in modern landscape painting. That's from this article. So it's pretty incredible. Even your closest ally, your closest friend, your closest confidant may not recognize what is going on with you. You've got to. You've got to recognize what you're doing. It's the most important that you know what you're doing, not that even the closest person does, and not worry about if they don't. Does that make sense? And it is sad. It is sad that basically no one in his life except him knew what he was doing or what he had done. It is sad. And so when he says the sadness will last forever, I wonder if he wasn't thinking about Starry Night. Is anyone ever going to realize what I was doing? And that's the happy part. Yes, thanks to Joe, thanks to this incredible trick and quirk of fate that Joe liked Shakespeare and Joe liked reading and Joe liked books. And Vincent van Gogh had written a lot of letters and Theo happened to keep them all. And Joe happened to start reading them. And Joe happened to write to Vincent a little bit in the last months of his life. And Joe also started to realize, wow, this guy is good, right? So it just gives you a sense of just how tragic Van Gogh's life was, that even his own brother, when he sees Starry Night, basically goes, yeah, keep trying, keep going, dude, you'll get there in the end, right? So, that's it from me. I am leaving you with, I think, is a really beautiful song that I hope is going to mean something to you, and I hope the words are going to reach you wherever you are. Thanks very much for being here, all of you. Much longer episode than I meant it to be, but thank you for being here. I think you'll agree it was a good episode. And thanks very, very, very much, Maria. Thanks a lot for your super chat. And I think there's another one as well. There's actually a couple. Yvonne and Robbie Robin, thank you to you guys as well. And Deborah has become a new member. Be sure to use the couple of new members only emoticons, so be sure to use those liberally, all the members. They're not many, but as soon as we have more members, then YouTube will allow me to upload more fun Van Gogh icons, emoticons. So I hope you guys will enjoy that. Anyway, that's it from me. That is it from me. Yeah, so from Yvonne, thanks very much. From Robbie Robin, from Maria Sierra, Deborah became a member. From episode 90, I'm planning on going members only from after the first hour. That's certainly the plan. Let's just have a look at your last comments. Yeah, they are fun. They definitely are fun. I'm really enjoying being on the same wavelength as my graphic designer. We really, she's also an artist, and I think that comes through. I don't really understand graphic designers that aren't artists, to be honest. Yeah, definitely. Bruni says, great episode. The poetry in these letters is astonishing. Well, that is so well said. I mean, that is exactly it. That is why we're able to be at Van Gogh letters 85. It's because the letters aren't like these dry, dead words. They really are this sort of living embodiment of a really incredible artist. So true. And I think when we finish with Van Gogh letters, I think we need to have like a Van Gogh book club where we share amongst ourselves the books that have meant the most to us in our lives and the books that we are reading now that mean a lot to us, because that's something that really enriched and edified him and made him such a great artist. And that's something I think that would be a wonderful and worthy aftermath to Van Gogh letters is Van Gogh book club. Okay, yeah, definitely. Yvonne says you're challenging me to become a member again. Yeah. I'll introduce my graphic designer to you in around about 2 weeks. Something special is going to happen, so I'll have her say hi. Chelsea, thank you for being here as well. Stephanie, it's been great to see you. I know you are someone who just loves this kind of stuff. Yvonne as well. So I must say, especially Yvonne and Stephanie, when I see you guys here, I feel that it's just so worth it talking about this stuff because I know how much you guys are interested in it. Many of the rest of you as well, Robbie, Robin, and Mel, and Chelsea, everyone that's here, Jody, Bruni, Maria. But I because I don't know, I've come such a long way with Stephanie and Yvonne, and Stephanie even we went together to the Van Gogh Museum. It's so great to share this stuff with you guys. So I'm glad that you are here. I actually haven't seen you, Stephanie, for a while. So I know you've been very busy with your sons, but it's really good to touch base again. We also didn't see Yvonne for a good long while, and it's good that everyone's back. So yeah, I hope you guys are going to enjoy the next couple of Van Gogh letters dealing with the asylum period. Some of it's pretty grim, but it's also deep and profound and important and meaningful. So I'm going to try and do this once or twice a week. And yeah, each one ought to be pretty. This period of his life really is profound. He's going through incredible struggles, but he also produces incredible art, and that makes it so special. Okay, guys, go off and watch the Stable song. If you don't have it, here it is again. Pay attention to the words and see if I'm right. Is he channeling Starry Night? Well, I think he is. I don't know if he's doing it deliberately or consciously, but if anything, it's unconscious. Anyway, yeah, to stay, I hope. I hope so too. JC, on my way to listen to Stable Song, just tuned in. By the way, thanks to JC who let me know about this particular musician, that I even know about this song because yeah. So thanks a lot to JC. I hope you're doing well. I'm glad you made it just before the end of this live. Anyway, take care, guys. Happy 4th of July. It's 4th of July where I am, but happy 4th of July. Take care. And again, thanks very much to all of you. And I'll see you guys next time. Ciao.